I am Rachel, 33 years old, and a single decision by my family almost landed my brother-in-law in federal prison. I came home from a grueling 2-week data privacy audit in Chicago. I was exhausted and just wanted to hold my cat, but my $18,000 F1 Savannah cat was gone. Instead of him greeting me at the door, I found my living room cluttered with 3 brand new iPhone 15 Pro Max boxes and a massive custom gaming PC taking up my dining table. When I asked my parents where he was, my mother did not even look at me. She just flipped a steak in my expensive pan and calmly said they sold him. She told me my sister's kids needed new phones and my brother-in-law needed a PC for his crypto startup. She said it was just an animal and I would get over it. I asked them exactly who they sold him to, and they just laughed in my face. They thought I was a pushover. They had no idea they had just triggered a chain of events that would destroy their lives forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your intelligence and treated your boundaries like a joke. Walking into my own home in the suburbs of Washington State usually brought me peace. I bought the 4-bedroom house entirely on my own salary as a senior data privacy auditor. I worked 80-hour weeks for a massive health technology corporation to afford the quiet neighborhood, the tall fenced yard, and the large windows that let the afternoon sun pour in. It was supposed to be my absolute sanctuary, away from the world. But for the last 4 months, it had been a living nightmare. My parents, Richard and Susan, had asked to stay in my guest rooms temporarily after a terrible financial investment wiped out their savings. Then my 30-year-old sister Brittany, her husband DeAndre, and their 3 young kids moved in because they were abruptly evicted from their apartment. I paid the $3,000 mortgage every single month. I paid the heavy utility bills. I bought all the groceries. Yet the moment I walked through my own front door that evening, I felt like a stranger trespassing on their personal territory. The first thing I noticed was the absolute silence in the hallway. Apollo, my F1 Savannah cat, always met me at the door without fail. He was a large, striking animal with gorgeous spotted fur, part wild African serval, and part domestic cat. He was completely legal to own, but required a very specific federal permit from the United States Department of Agriculture, a permit that took me months of paperwork and background checks to secure. More than his $18,000 price tag, or his registered microchip Apollo, was my only true companion. He was the only living creature in my entire life who loved me unconditionally without asking for a cash loan or a favor. I dropped my heavy suitcase onto the hardwood floor. The house smelled like expensive ribeye steaks frying in butter. I walked into the living room and froze in my tracks. The space was completely trashed and unrecognizable. My custom velvet sofa was covered in torn wrapping paper and empty plastic shopping bags. Sitting proudly in the center of the glass coffee table were 3 identical white boxes. They were the latest iPhone 15 Pro Max models. Next to them, dominating the dining table I had imported from Italy, was a gigantic custom gaming computer with glowing neon cooling tubes and an ultra-wide monitor. It looked like it cost at least $5,000 to build. Panic immediately set in. I called out for Apollo, frantically checking behind the sofa and looking under the carpeted stairs. Nothing. My heart began to pound violently against my ribs. I practically ran into the kitchen, where my mother Susan was standing at the stove. She was wearing my favorite silk robe, the one I explicitly asked her never to touch. My father Richard was sitting lazily at the breakfast bar, drinking an imported beer he took from my private mini-fridge in the garage. "Where is Apollo?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, despite my shaking hands. Susan sighed heavily, acting as if my very presence was an exhausting inconvenience to her evening. She used a pair of metal tongs to flip the thick steak, loudly scraping the non-stick surface of my expensive pan. She did not even bother to turn around and look at me. "We sold him," she said, casually adjusting the heat on the gas burner. "Your sister's kids needed new phones for school because they were being bullied for having old models." And DeAndre lost his job again last week, so he really needed a proper computer for his new crypto business. You have a good paying job, Rachel. You will get over it. It is just a cat. The room seemed to spin wildly out of control. I stared at the back of her head, completely unable to process the sheer audacity of her words. You sold my cat. I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh, strained whisper. Richard took a slow sip of his beer and glared at me with pure annoyance. Stop being so overly dramatic, Rachel. It was a wild animal anyway, and it smelled bad. DeAndre found a guy on the internet who paid $4,000 cash for it today. It was a massive win for everyone here. The family needed the money a lot more than you needed a fancy pet to show off. You always were so selfish, constantly holding your money over our heads, while your poor sister struggles to survive. Before I could even formulate a response, heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. DeAndre walked confidently into the kitchen, wiping grease off his hands with a paper towel. He was a tall man who always carried himself with an unearned sense of supreme authority. He looked at my pale, shocked face and smirked, his dark eyes gleaming with absolute arrogance. What is the problem, boss lady? He sneered casually, tossing the dirty paper towel onto the clean counter. Do not tell me you are actually crying over a stupid cat. You should be down on your knees thanking me right now. I got $4,000 for that oversized rat. I kept my cut for the new business, bought the kids some nice gear, and even gave your parents a little spending money for the week. You are welcome. I looked at him, feeling a terrifying calmness wash over me. The emotional devastation of losing Apollo was suddenly replaced by the cold, calculating logic of my demanding profession. As a data auditor, my entire career was built on tracking digital information, identifying security breaches, and holding people legally accountable. DeAndre was standing in my kitchen, openly bragging about stealing an $18,000 federally regulated microchipped exotic animal and selling it for a fraction of its real value to an anonymous stranger on the internet. Exactly who did you sell him to? I asked, my tone deadpan. DeAndre laughed loudly, a booming, mocking sound that made my skin crawl. Like I would ever tell you that. The guy picked him up in an unmarked van 2 days ago. He is probably halfway across the country by now. You are never seeing that cat again. Get over it and go unpack your bags. We are eating dinner in 10 minutes, and you are standing in the way. My mother nodded in agreement, finally plating the steaks. Go wash your hands, Rachel. Stop ruining the evening for everyone else. I did not move an inch. I did not scream. I did not throw a massive tantrum like they clearly expected me to. I simply reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and dialed 911. I put the phone on speaker mode and set it flat on the granite counter so they could all hear it ringing. 911. What is your exact emergency? The dispatcher asked. Yes, I am reporting a grand larceny at my residence, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. A high-value exotic animal has been stolen and illegally sold. The perpetrators are currently standing in my kitchen and have verbally confessed to the theft. DeAndre's smirk did not waver at all. He confidently crossed his muscular arms over his chest and chuckled under his breath. Go ahead and call the cops, he whispered, leaning in close enough so I could smell the cheap cologne he wore. They are not going to care about a missing pet. You are just wasting their time, and you are going to look like a crazy, hysterical woman. I run this house now, Rachel. He truly had no idea what he had just done. The wait for the police felt like an eternity, though the digital clock on my oven told me it had only been 12 minutes. During that time, the kitchen transformed into a bizarre stage play. My mother quickly wiped down the counters, humming a cheerful tune as if we were expecting dinner guests. My father grabbed a cloth and began polishing his beer bottle. DeAndre leaned against the refrigerator, casually scrolling through his brand new iPhone, occasionally glancing up to shoot me a smug, knowing smile. When the heavy knock finally sounded at the front door, I moved to answer it, but DeAndre was faster. He swung the door open wide to reveal 2 local police officers. Instantly, his entire demeanor shifted. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by a warm, welcoming expression of a concerned family man. He stepped back, gesturing for the officers to enter my home. "Good evening, officers," DeAndre said, his voice smooth and respectful. "We are so sorry to waste your time tonight. Please come in." The older officer, a man with graying hair and a tired expression, looked between DeAndre and me. "We got a call about a stolen exotic animal and a confessed grand larceny," he said, pulling out a small notepad. DeAndre let out a heavy, sympathetic sigh and looked at me with absolute fake pity. "I am afraid my sister-in-law is having a severe mental health crisis," he explained, lowering his voice just enough to sound genuine. "She works 80 hours a week at a high-stress corporate job. She just got off a flight and, sadly, her cat slipped out the back door while we were carrying in the groceries. We have been looking for it all afternoon." I gasped, stepping forward. "That is a complete lie," I stated firmly. "They just admitted to selling Apollo for $4,000 to buy those new phones and that computer in the living room." The younger officer glanced at the extravagant electronics, then back to DeAndre. DeAndre chuckled, shaking his head as if I were a confused toddler. "Officer, I am a day trader in the cryptocurrency market. I just pulled a minor profit this morning and decided to treat my kids to new phones for school and upgrade my home office equipment. I have the digital receipts right here on my phone." He held up his screen, showing them a fake crypto wallet dashboard he probably downloaded an hour ago. My mother stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her dry hands on a dish towel. "It is true, officers," she said, putting on her best sweet elderly lady voice. "Rachel has been under so much pressure at work. She has not been sleeping. She is very attached to that cat, and we understand she is upset it ran away, but making up these wild accusations is just her way of lashing out." My father nodded in agreement, pointing a thumb at me. "She has a history of these emotional outbursts," he added calmly. "We are just trying to keep the peace and get through dinner." I stood there, utterly paralyzed by how flawlessly they orchestrated this lie. They had seamlessly banded together to paint me as a hysterical, overworked spinster, losing her grip on reality. I looked at the officers. "You can check the transaction history," I urged them. "You can check the neighborhood security cameras to see the unmarked van DeAndre mentioned." The older officer closed his notepad with a dull snap. "Ma'am, we do not have a search warrant for his financial records, and unless you have video footage of him physically handing the cat to a buyer—" "This is entirely he said, she said situation." "But this is my house," I insisted, my voice rising just a fraction. "And my federally registered animal is missing." The officer sighed, hooking his thumbs into his duty belt. "Look, ma'am, you all live here together. There are no signs of forced entry. There is no physical evidence of a transaction. As far as the law is concerned right now, this is a civil family dispute over a missing pet. If you want to pursue this, you need to take him to small claims court. Have a good night, folks." And just like that, they turned around and walked out the door. The moment the latch clicked shut, the heavy silence returned to the room. The sweet, concerned masks my family wore instantly melted away. My mother scoffed, turning back to her steaks. "See, Rachel, I told you to stop being dramatic. Now go wash up." DeAndre walked slowly toward me, his chest puffed out. He stopped inches from my face, looking down at me with eyes full of pure malice. He cleared his throat and deliberately spat a glob of saliva right onto my expensive Persian rug. "You really thought the cops were going to take the word of a crazy cat lady over a respectable family man?" he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "You have zero proof. You have zero power. I run this house now, Rachel. You just pay the bills." I looked down at the spit on my rug, then up into his arrogant eyes. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. Instead, I walked calmly over to the dining table where my leather briefcase was sitting. I unbuckled the brass clasps and pulled out a thick stack of papers bound by a heavy metal clip. The top page featured a bright red legal stamp from the county courthouse. I walked back to the living room and slammed the stack of papers directly onto DeAndre's brand new glowing gaming keyboard. The loud smack made everyone in the room jump. "What is this garbage?" DeAndre snapped, reaching for the papers. "I suggest you read it very carefully," I said, my voice echoing coldly off the walls. "That is a legally binding court-approved 30-day eviction notice. Because this is my house. My name is on the deed, my name is on the mortgage, and my name is on the property tax records. Legally, the four of you are classified as month-to-month tenants without a lease. And as of this morning, your tenancy has been officially terminated. DeAndre stared at the red stamp, his jaw tightening. My father stood up from his bar stool, his face flushing red. You cannot do this, Rachel, he yelled. We are your family. Where are we supposed to go? I looked straight at my father, then at DeAndre. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your crypto empire, your new phones, and get the hell out of my property, I replied. And if you are not gone by midnight on the 30th day, I will not be calling the local police to complain about a missing cat. I will be calling the county sheriff to physically drag you and your belongings out onto the curb. Your time is up. For a long moment, the only sound in the living room was the soft hum of the glowing neon tubes inside DeAndre's new custom gaming computer. The silence shattered the second the reality of the red legal stamp registered in my parents' minds. Richard's face twisted from shock into absolute rage. He slammed his beer bottle down onto my kitchen island so hard I thought the thick glass would shatter. You ungrateful little brat, he bellowed, his voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. We gave you life. We raised you. And you are throwing us out onto the street over a damn animal. Susan rushed forward, her face flushed with indignation, pointing a perfectly manicured finger right at my chest. You are a monster, Rachel, she shrieked, her sweet elderly lady facade completely abandoned. How can you be so cruel? Brittany has 3 little children. You are kicking 3 innocent babies out into the freezing Washington winter just weeks before the holidays. You have no heart. If you do this, I will disown you. You will be dead to me. Do you hear me? Dead to me. I looked at her pointing finger and felt absolutely nothing. I am already dead to you, Mother, I replied evenly, not raising my voice even a fraction. You just used my house as a free hotel and my bank account as a personal ATM. Disown me all you want. The eviction stands. Right on cue, the sound of heavy footsteps came stomping down the carpeted stairs. My sister Brittany burst into the room. She was wearing perfectly matching pastel lounge clothes, her hair styled in effortless, messy waves, which was her signature look for her mediocre mommy vlog. What is going on down here? She demanded, looking at the red stamped paper resting on the keyboard. DeAndre snatched up the paper and shoved it toward her. Your crazy sister is kicking us out, he growled. She got a legal eviction notice because she is throwing a tantrum over that stupid cat I sold. Brittany stared at the document, her eyes widening. But instead of arguing with me or trying to apologize for her husband stealing my property, her instincts as a desperate social media influencer kicked in. A dangerous, calculating light flashed in her eyes. She did not yell. She immediately pulled her iPhone out of her pocket, stepped back into the perfect overhead lighting of the hallway, and hit record on her camera. Hey guys, Brittany said to her lens, her voice instantly dropping into a trembling, fragile whisper. I am sorry to post something so heavy, but my family is in a terrifying situation right now, and I need to ask for prayers. I watched in quiet disbelief as she forced actual tears to well up in her eyes. She expertly angled the camera to capture the eviction notice on the table behind her, completely ignoring the massive pile of expensive tech DeAndre had just bought with my stolen property. We are being thrown out onto the street. Brittany sobbed to her invisible audience, wiping a single perfect tear from her cheek. My sister has completely lost her mind. She has been suffering from severe mental instability, and tonight she just snapped. We have been nothing but supportive, and out of nowhere, she handed us a 30-day eviction notice. She is legally forcing me, my husband, and my 3 young babies out into the freezing winter snow. This is pure financial abuse. We have nowhere to go. Please share this video. We are so scared of what she might do next. She hit stop, reviewed the footage for exactly 3 seconds, and uploaded it to TikTok. Then she looked up at me, the tears instantly drying up like magic. Her face settled into a cold, triumphant smirk. Try kicking us out now, she taunted. My followers will tear you apart. You are going to be the most hated woman on the internet by tomorrow morning. I did not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I calmly picked up my empty suitcase, walked past all of them, and went straight up to my master bedroom. I stepped inside, shut the heavy oak door, and locked the deadbolt. I could hear them downstairs, their voices a muffled chorus of outrage and vindictive planning. My heart ached terribly for Apollo. I had no idea where he was or what kind of conditions he was being kept in by that Nevada trafficker. But I knew that acting out of panic would not save him. I needed cold, hard facts, and I needed to let my family think they were winning. I barely slept that night. I sat by the window watching the frost settle on the trees in the backyard, mentally preparing for the war I was about to wage. When the sun finally rose, casting a pale gray light into my room, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up and opened my social media apps. Brittany's warning had not been an idle threat. Her video had exploded overnight. It already had 2 million views, fueled by the algorithm's love for family drama and crying mothers. The comments were a relentless flood of vitriol directed entirely at me. Thousands of strangers were calling me a psychopath, a greedy corporate villain, and a danger to society. Some internet sleuths had already found my full name and my LinkedIn profile. My inbox was overflowing with death threats from people who thought they were defending a helpless mother of 3. I was just taking a screenshot of the video metrics for my records when my phone screen suddenly switched to an incoming call. My stomach dropped when I read the caller ID. It was my boss, the regional director of the data security firm. I took a deep breath and answered. "Good morning, David." "Rachel, what on earth is going on?" David demanded, his voice tight with panic and barely suppressed anger. "Our corporate public relations department has been fielding furious phone calls since 6 in the morning. People are leaving 1-star reviews on our company page demanding that we fire you. Someone linked your sister's viral video to our corporate account." David. "I can explain," I started to say, but he cut me off. "I do not want to hear about your family drama, Rachel. We handle highly sensitive data privacy for massive health corporations. We cannot have a senior auditor publicly accused of financial abuse and mental instability. It destroys our credibility and makes us look like a massive liability to our clients." There was a heavy pause on the line. Effective immediately, David continued, his tone turning completely professional and icy. "You are being placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. Hand over your corporate laptop to IT this afternoon. Do not contact any clients. Do not come into the office. We will call you when this public relations nightmare is resolved." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the blank screen. Brittany and DeAndre had just cost me my income, my professional reputation, and my only companion. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought stripping away my livelihood would break me and force me to submit to their demands. Instead, they had just given me all the free time in the world to properly destroy them. I stepped out of my bedroom and stood silently at the top of the carpeted stairs. Down in the kitchen, the atmosphere was festive, sounding exactly like a New Year celebration. I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork. My father was opening a vintage bottle of champagne I had received as a corporate bonus and specifically saved in the pantry for a special occasion. Laughter echoed through the hallway. My mother was loudly praising Brittany for her incredible acting skills on the video, commenting on how natural her tears looked and how it would surely bring in new sponsorships. Brittany giggled proudly, announcing that her follower count had doubled in just a few hours, and that she was already drafting a link to a crowdfunding campaign to help her poor evicted family. Then I heard DeAndre's booming voice. He was pacing in the living room, talking loudly on his new phone to one of his shady business partners. He was bragging about how he had completely broken me. He told the person on the other end of the line that I was a hysterical mess, that my boss had just suspended me, and that I would be begging him to pay the mortgage by the end of the month. He laughed, that arrogant, chest-rumbling laugh of his. He boasted about his incoming crypto wealth, claiming his digital wallets were about to explode in value. He said once I was completely broke, he would graciously allow me to stay in the basement if I learned my place and showed him some respect. They truly believed they had won. They thought stripping away my professional reputation was the final nail in my coffin. I turned away from the stairs, walked down the hall to my home office, and locked the heavy, solid wood door behind me. I flipped the light switch, illuminating my true sanctuary. This room was not just a place where I answered emails. It was a high-tech command center. I had dual widescreen monitors, a dedicated secure server rack humming quietly in the corner, and a direct hardwired connection to a custom encrypted router I built myself. My family thought I was just an overgrown secretary who typed on a keyboard for a living. They had absolutely no concept of what a data privacy auditor actually does. My entire career is built on penetrating secure networks, tracking hidden digital footprints, and uncovering financial data that highly intelligent executives try to bury. Tracking a lazy, arrogant amateur like DeAndre was going to be child's play. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair, woke up my workstation, and cracked my knuckles. I brought up the administrative portal for my home network router. Because I paid the internet bill and designed the network architecture, I had absolute God-level access to every single byte of data that flowed through the house. I quickly identified the unique MAC address of DeAndre's old phone and his shiny new iPhone 15. He was incredibly sloppy. He thought that clearing his mobile browser history and deleting his text messages made his actions invisible. He did not understand that nothing on the internet is ever truly deleted, especially when it passes through a router logging every single packet of data. I ran a packet sniffer protocol I had developed for corporate audits and began decrypting his recent web traffic from the past 48 hours. Rows of green code cascaded down my left monitor. I filtered the results by outbound messages and secure browser requests. What I found made my blood run cold, stripping away any lingering trace of familial mercy I might have had left. DeAndre did not sell Apollo on Craigslist. That was a pathetic lie fabricated for the local police. Craigslist does not have the kind of clientele willing to drop thousands of dollars in cash on an exotic animal with zero paperwork. I traced his browser history directly to an encrypted forum on the dark web, a marketplace specifically known for illegal wildlife trading and black market breeding operations. I ran a recovery script on the cached text messages he had sent through a burner messaging application. The application was supposed to auto-delete the chats, but my network had already archived the data packets. I pieced the fragmented data back together and read the exact transcript of his negotiation. He was speaking with an anonymous buyer operating out of Las Vegas, Nevada. And DeAndre did not sell my beautiful cat for $4,000. He sold Apollo for $8,000. He pocketed half the money in an offshore crypto wallet and used the remaining $4,000 to buy his computer and the phones to keep my parents and sister quiet. The buyer had arranged for a specialized unmarked temperature-controlled transport van to pick Apollo up from the alley behind my house while I was on my flight home. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glowing monitors, as the terrifying reality of the situation fully materialized in my mind. Apollo was currently in the hands of an underground exotic animal trafficker. But as the panic tried to claw its way up my throat, my professional legal training took over. Apollo was not a normal domestic house cat. He was an F1 Savannah. He had wild serval blood. Because of his genetic lineage, he required a specialized permit from the United States Department of Agriculture. He had a federally registered microchip embedded between his shoulder blades. I pulled up the federal legal database on my right monitor and typed in a specific statute. Selling a federally regulated exotic animal across state lines without the proper USDA documentation and health certificates was not a local civil dispute. It was a direct violation of the Lacey Act, one of the strictest federal conservation laws in the United States. Furthermore, conducting the sale across state borders using digital wire communications constituted federal wire fraud. DeAndre thought he had committed a clever little local misdemeanor that the neighborhood cops would ignore. He was wrong. Transporting a microchipped F1 Savannah cat into Nevada was a federal felony. He had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to lock him away in a federal penitentiary. The very next afternoon, my parents decided to throw a massive backyard barbecue. They framed it as an impromptu celebration of DeAndre's exciting new business venture, but I knew the real reason behind the gathering. It was a victory party designed to cement my downfall. They invited a large portion of our extended family over to bask in my absolute public humiliation. From the window of my home office, I watched cars line the street outside my property. Relatives poured through the side gate and into the backyard, carrying large bowls of potato salad, cases of cheap beer, and trays of desserts. The thick smell of burning charcoal and sweet barbecue sauce drifted up through the air, completely filling the neighborhood. I could hear the loud, obnoxious laughter of my aunts and uncles echoing across the lawn. They were all talking animatedly about Brittany's viral TikTok video. I knew exactly what the script was supposed to be. I was supposed to stay locked in my bedroom weeping over my unjustly suspended corporate job and my ruined professional reputation. I was supposed to be hiding from the judgmental stares of my family, crippled by the shame of being painted as an abusive monster on the internet. Instead, I saved the encrypted server logs detailing DeAndre's illegal transaction onto an isolated, secure cloud drive. I took a quick, refreshing shower, put on a vibrant yellow sundress, and slipped on my favorite sandals. If they desperately wanted a villain in their narrative, I was going to give them a terrifyingly calm one. I walked steadily down the stairs and stepped out onto the wooden patio. The moment the heavy sliding glass door clicked shut behind me, the loud chatter in the yard instantly died down. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on a stereo system. Every single head turned to stare at me. The collective judgment in their eyes was heavy and suffocating. My mother, Susan, immediately stopped pouring lemonade into plastic cups and glared at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. Brittany was sitting in a comfortable lawn chair, under the shade of the patio umbrella, holding her youngest child tightly to her chest, looking exactly like a tragic martyr seeking protection. Before I could even reach the large cooler to grab a bottle of water, my Uncle Greg stepped directly into my path, completely blocking my way. He was a large, imposing man who always had a harsh opinion on how everyone else should live their lives. He crossed his thick arms over his chest and shook his head in profound disappointment. "You really have some nerve showing your face out here today, Rachel," he said, his voice booming loud enough for the entire yard to hear clearly. "We all saw the video your sister posted. We all know you lost your fancy corporate job this morning because you are completely unstable and abusive. Evicting your own sister and her innocent babies right before the winter holidays is a sick, twisted thing to do. You always thought you were better than us because of your paycheck, but you are an absolute embarrassment to this entire family. Your parents gave you everything, and this is how you repay their kindness. You should pack your bags and leave this house right now out of sheer respect for the damage you have caused." I looked calmly at Uncle Greg's red, angry face. I did not defend myself against his ridiculous accusations. I did not try to explain that DeAndre stole my $18,000 pet to buy computer equipment. I knew deep down that these people did not care about the actual truth. They only cared about the entertaining drama and the opportunity to tear down a successful woman. I smiled politely, stepped smoothly right past my seething uncle, and walked directly over to the buffet table. I picked up a paper plate, grabbed a freshly grilled hot dog, and added a generous amount of yellow mustard. I stood quietly at the edge of the patio, taking a bite of my food, while the rest of the family watched me in stunned, uncomfortable silence. Once they realized I was not going to engage in a desperate screaming match to defend my honor, the party slowly and awkwardly resumed its normal volume. I kept my eyes firmly fixed on DeAndre. He was standing by the large stainless steel grill, completely in his element. He was holding a cold beer in one hand and waving his shiny new iPhone 15 in the other. A small, eager crowd of my younger cousins had gathered around him, hanging on to his every word as if he were a financial guru. DeAndre was loudly bragging about his cryptocurrency wallets and his digital investments. He was arrogantly explaining how traditional banking and corporate jobs were for fools who liked being slaves to the system. He claimed his latest investments were going to make him a multimillionaire by the end of the year. He proudly announced that he was the new primary provider for the family and promised to take my parents on a luxury Caribbean cruise once his crypto coins hit their target market cap. He looked so incredibly pleased with himself. He was the undisputed king of the backyard, soaking up the unearned admiration he felt he truly deserved. I finished my hot dog, wiped my hands neatly with a paper napkin, and walked casually toward the grill. The circle of younger cousins parted ways immediately, looking extremely uncomfortable as I approached. DeAndre stopped talking mid-sentence. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he puffed out his chest, clearly ready to put me in my place again in front of an attentive audience. "Have you finally come out here to apologize, Rachel?" DeAndre asked loudly, making sure everyone on the patio could hear his mocking tone. "Because I told you yesterday I am the man of this house now and you need to learn some basic respect." I stepped directly into his personal space, getting so close I could actually see the nervous sweat forming on his forehead. I kept my voice incredibly low, a quiet, sharp whisper meant only for his ears. "I do not care about your fake crypto wallets, DeAndre," I whispered coldly. "But I do care about the encrypted dark web forum you used to contact an illegal animal buyer in Las Vegas. I care about the burner messaging app you stupidly thought you deleted from your network history." DeAndre went completely rigid. The arrogant color drained from his face at an alarming speed, leaving him looking sickly pale. "The Lacey Act makes it a federal felony to transport a microchipped exotic animal across state lines without USDA permits." I continued, my voice perfectly smooth and lethal. "Wire fraud adds another 20 years to your sentence. You have exactly 2 hours to get my cat back here unharmed. If Apollo is not sitting in my living room by 4 o'clock, I am hitting send on a complete digital dossier to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and heavily armed federal agents will raid this barbecue before the sun goes down." DeAndre stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. The spatula in his hand trembled slightly, a clear betrayer of the panic suddenly flooding his system. He darted a nervous glance toward the side gate, as if expecting federal agents to storm through the wood panels right that very second. For a brief, glorious moment, I watched the arrogant king of the patio realize the fragile paper castle he built was actively catching fire. But before the reality of a federal prison sentence could fully crush his ego, Brittany marched over to the grill. She shifted her toddler onto her hip and shot me a look of pure venom. "What lies are you whispering to my husband now, Rachel?" she demanded, her voice shrill enough to cut through the background chatter of our relatives. DeAndre swallowed hard and looked at her. "She knows about the guy in Nevada," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "She says she tracked my phone and is going to call the feds." Brittany rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in the back of her head. She let out a loud theatrical scoff that drew the attention of my parents, who were mingling nearby. "Are you seriously scared of her, DeAndre?" she asked, laughing bitterly. "Look at her. She is a glorified data entry clerk who just got suspended from her boring job because she cannot handle her emotions. She does not know how to track anything. She is just bluffing to scare you because she is bitter and pathetic. She probably just guessed you sold it out of state." The validation from his wife acted like an instant shot of adrenaline to DeAndre's bruised ego. The color returned to his face, replaced by a dark, aggressive flush. His panic morphed back into rage. He slammed his beer bottle down onto the side of the grill and took a massive step toward me, using his height and broad shoulders to physically box me in against the hot stainless steel. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes dark with the threat of physical violence. "You listen to me, you crazy witch!" he snarled, dropping all pretenses of being the polite family man. "You are going to walk your ridiculous self upstairs right now, unlock your little office, and hand over your laptop. I am going to smash that computer into a million pieces. And if you even think about dialing a phone number, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable life. Give me the keys to your office right now." He reached out and grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. Several of my aunts and uncles gasped, but my father, Richard, simply stood there with his arms crossed, watching the confrontation without making a single move to protect me. He was perfectly fine letting his son-in-law physically intimidate me if it meant I would finally be put in my place. I looked down at DeAndre's hand gripping my arm, then back up into his furious eyes. I did not struggle. I did not shrink away. I smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that finally made him hesitate. You really are an amateur, DeAndre, I said softly. Do you honestly think an enterprise-level data privacy auditor stores sensitive federal evidence on a physical local hard drive? My laptop is practically empty. The moment I compiled your network logs, the encrypted transcripts from the dark web and your bank routing numbers, I uploaded the entire dossier to a secure, decentralized offshore cloud server. Smashing my computer will do absolutely nothing. The files are locked behind a biometric firewall that only I can access. If I do not enter my secure password every 12 hours, the server automatically forwards the entire package to the authorities. It is a dead man's switch. DeAndre slowly released my arm, his tough guy facade shattering into a million pieces, but I did not stop there. I turned my attention to my father, who had stepped closer to see what was happening. Richard was frowning, clearly annoyed that DeAndre had not successfully terrified me into submission. Since we are talking about your brilliant son-in-law, Richard, I said, raising my voice just enough so the surrounding relatives could hear every single word. You might want to know exactly how he has been funding his sudden lavish lifestyle. DeAndre is not a successful day trader. He has been hiding his digital assets from the government because he does not want to pay capital gains taxes. But to open those offshore crypto wallets, he needed a clean identity. He needed a valid social security number with a solid credit history. Richard blinked, his annoyed expression faltering. What are you talking about? He demanded. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and unlocked the screen. When I audited the network traffic, I did not just find the animal trafficker, I explained calmly. I cross-referenced the IP addresses and ran a trace on the digital wallets DeAndre has been bragging about all afternoon. He used your social security number, Richard. He forged your digital signature to bypass the Know Your Customer regulations on 3 different crypto exchanges. He has been illegally shielding hundreds of thousands of dollars in undeclared capital gains under your name. The barbecue tongs slipped out of Richard's hand and clattered loudly onto the patio deck. He stared at DeAndre in absolute horror. Tell me she is lying, DeAndre. My father choked out, his face turning an ashen gray. Tell me you did not steal my identity. DeAndre could not even formulate a sentence. He just backed away, shaking his head rapidly, looking like a cornered rat. Oh, he absolutely did, I confirmed, holding up my phone. I had a digital form already loaded on my screen. It was the official Internal Revenue Service whistleblower submission portal. All the encrypted data, the forged signatures, and the wallet addresses were already attached to the file. I looked directly into my father's terrified eyes. The IRS does not play games with wire fraud and tax evasion, Richard Barge stated, my thumb hovering directly over the bright blue submit button. When they see this level of federal tax fraud attached to your identity, the first thing they are going to do is freeze every single asset associated with your name until the investigation is complete. No, Rachel, please, my father begged, reaching his hand out toward me. Please do not do this. My pension is in that account. My entire retirement fund. You will ruin me. You watched your son-in-law steal my property, you cheered when my sister destroyed my career, and you stood by while he threatened to assault me. I replied, my voice devoid of any mercy. You ruined yourself. I pressed send. A green checkmark appeared on the screen confirming the massive digital dossier had been successfully transmitted to the Internal Revenue Service. It is done, I announced to the dead silent patio. Your retirement funds are now officially tied to federal tax fraud. Have a wonderful barbecue. I did not wait to see if any of my relatives had an appetite left. I turned my back on the stunned crowd, walked smoothly across the wooden deck, and went back inside my house. I locked my bedroom door, fed myself a simple salad for dinner, and went to sleep feeling more at peace than I had in months. Downstairs, the barbecue abruptly ended. I could hear cars starting in the driveway as extended family members hastily fled the property, desperate to distance themselves from the impending federal fallout. I heard muffled arguments through the floorboards, Brittany sobbing and DeAndre pacing furiously. But they did not try to break my door down. They spent the entire night living in absolute terror, waiting for a consequence they prayed was just an empty threat. Their prayers were not answered. At exactly 6 o'clock the next morning, the fragile silence of the neighborhood was shattered. I was already awake drinking a cup of black coffee by my bedroom window when a convoy of unmarked black SUVs and two armored transport vehicles turned sharply onto my street. They did not park neatly by the curb. They drove straight up onto the manicured front lawn, crushing the decorative flower beds my mother had planted. Dozens of heavily armed agents swarmed the property. These were not the bored, tired local police officers DeAndre had easily manipulated the night before. These men and women were wearing thick Kevlar vests, emblazoned with bright yellow letters, reading FBI and USFWS, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Before anyone inside the house could even react to the sound of the tires tearing up the grass, a heavy steel battering ram slammed into the solid oak front door. The wood splintered violently, the frame buckling under the immense force. "Federal agents with a search warrant, get on the ground," a voice roared, amplified by a megaphone. I stepped out of my bedroom and stood safely at the top of the stairs, watching the chaos unfold below. The hallway was instantly flooded with tactical flashlights and armed personnel. My parents rushed out of the guest room screaming in pure terror. Susan threw her hands over her head and dropped to her knees on the hardwood floor, sobbing hysterically. Richard stood frozen in his pajamas, his face pale as a ghost as an agent firmly ordered him against the wall and patted him down for weapons. But the main target was down the hall. A team of 4 agents kicked open the door to the master suite that Brittany and DeAndre had shamelessly claimed for themselves. I heard Brittany let out a blood-curdling shriek. Less than 10 seconds later, DeAndre was dragged out into the hallway. He was wearing nothing but a pair of silk boxers, his hands aggressively zip-tied behind his back. The arrogant crypto king who claimed he ran my house was openly weeping, his face shoved roughly against the drywall while an agent read him his Miranda rights. DeAndre is being placed under federal arrest for felony violations of the Lacey Act conspiracy to traffic regulated wildlife and interstate wire fraud, the lead FBI agent announced loudly, his voice echoing through the chaotic house. They hauled DeAndre down the stairs, his bare feet stumbling over the steps. They dragged him straight out the shattered front door and threw him onto the cold morning grass of the front lawn, forcing him to sit in full view of all the neighbors who were now peeking through their blinds. Inside the house, the evidence collection team immediately went to work. Agents wearing blue latex gloves marched into the living room with large plastic bins. Brittany ran out of her bedroom, clutching her robe tightly around her shaking body. "Stop, what are you doing?" she screamed as an agent disconnected the glowing neon tubes of the custom gaming computer. "That belongs to my husband. You cannot just take our things." The agent did not even look at her. He placed the heavy computer tower into an evidence bin and secured the lid. "All electronic devices purchased with the proceeds of illegal wildlife trafficking and wire fraud are subject to immediate federal seizure," he stated mechanically. Another agent walked over to the glass coffee table and grabbed the 3 brand-new iPhone 15 Pro Max boxes. Brittany lunged forward to grab them, but a female agent instantly blocked her path, putting a firm hand on Brittany's shoulder. "Step back right now, ma'am, or you will be arrested for interfering with a federal search warrant," the female agent warned, her tone leaving absolutely zero room for argument. Brittany recoiled as if she had been burned. She watched helplessly as the phones, the computer, and several stacks of financial documents DeAndre had printed were hauled out the front door and loaded into the back of an armored SUV. DeAndre was pulled up from the grass and shoved into the back of a different vehicle, the heavy doors slamming shut behind him with a final echoing thud. The federal agents finished their sweep, handed my terrified father a copy of the search warrant, and marched out of the house. The entire raid lasted less than 20 minutes. The convoy reversed off the lawn and sped away down the street, leaving the front door hanging off its hinges, and my family standing in the ruins of their own arrogance. Brittany collapsed onto the living room sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Dad, you have to do something," she wailed, her voice cracking with desperation. "They are going to put him in federal prison. You have to call a lawyer right now. You need to bail him out before they put him in a cell with real criminals." Richard was trembling violently. He stumbled toward the kitchen island and grabbed his laptop, flipping it open with shaking hands. "How much is federal bail?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I read online that for wire fraud, it is at least $50,000. Brittany sobbed, wiping black mascara streaks off her cheeks. "Just pull it from your retirement account, Dad. I promise DeAndre will pay you back the second he gets access to his crypto wallets again. Please, Dad, hurry." Richard rapidly typed his credentials into his brokerage account portal. The screen loaded for a few agonizing seconds. I walked slowly down the stairs and stood at the bottom step, watching the color completely drain from my father's face. He stared at the screen, his mouth falling open in a silent gasp. "What is it?" Brittany demanded, running over to look over his shoulder. Richard did not answer her. He could not. Glowing brightly across the center of his laptop screen was a massive red banner with bold white letters. It did not display his account balance. It did not show his available withdrawal limits. It displayed only one terrifying sentence: "Account frozen, pending federal investigation by the Internal Revenue Service." Richard stared at this glowing red banner on his laptop screen, his entire body going completely rigid. He pressed the refresh button with a trembling finger, desperately hoping it was a temporary computer glitch. The page reloaded, but the terrifying message remained exactly the same. His life savings, his pension, every single dollar he had worked for over the past 40 years was completely inaccessible. He slowly looked up from the screen, his eyes hollow and defeated. The arrogant patriarch who had stood by and watched his son-in-law threaten me the night before was now completely broken. "There is no money," Richard whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his sudden financial ruin. "They locked everything. I cannot bail him out. I cannot even buy groceries. I have absolutely nothing left." Brittany snatched the laptop from the kitchen island, frantically banging her manicured fingers against the keyboard as if hitting the keys harder would magically unlock the funds. When the reality finally registered in her mind, she let out a guttural scream of pure frustration. She slammed the expensive computer shut, leaving our father standing there like a hollow shell of a man, and sprinted back toward the open front door. I followed her out onto the porch, watching the chaotic scene unfold on my front lawn. The suburban street was lined with neighbors who had stepped out of their houses in their bathrobes, holding their morning coffee, watching the incredible spectacle. DeAndre was currently being pushed into the back of a black federal transport vehicle. He looked pathetic, shivering in his silk boxers, his previous arrogance entirely erased by the cold reality of federal custody. Brittany ran barefoot across the destroyed grass, her silk robe flapping in the chilly morning wind, completely ignoring the dozens of watchful eyes from the neighborhood. "Wait, you cannot take him!" Brittany shrieked, waving her arms frantically as she approached the federal agents. "Stop the car right now. You are making a massive mistake. He is the father of 3 young children. He is a respected crypto investor. You are ruining our family over a stupid animal. It is just a stupid cat." The lead United States Fish and Wildlife agent, a tall woman with an incredibly stern face and zero patience for suburban melodrama, stopped writing on her clipboard. She turned around and looked at my sister with a mixture of professional detachment and mild disgust. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you step back from the federal transport vehicle," the agent warned, her voice cutting through the crisp morning air like a knife. "But it is just a cat," Brittany wailed, stomping her bare foot on the cold concrete driveway like a petulant toddler who had just been denied a toy. "Rachel is just a jealous, unstable spinster. She set him up because she hates seeing me happy. You have to let my husband go right now. I will write you a check for whatever that mangy animal cost. I will give you $500 right now. Just let him out of that car and we can forget this ever happened." The federal agent let out a heavy sigh, clearly exhausted by my sister's blatant ignorance and staggering entitlement. She stepped directly into Brittany's path, forcing my sister to stop her frantic advance toward the armored vehicle. "Let me explain exactly what your husband has done," the agent said coldly, projecting her voice so the entire neighborhood could hear the charges loud and clear. "The animal he stole is a registered F1 Savannah. It is not a common house pet. It is an extremely rare hybrid breed with a documented market value of $18,000. By stealing a registered asset of that specific financial magnitude, your husband committed grand larceny. Brittany's jaw dropped. The absurd $500 bribe she had just offered hung awkwardly in the air, highlighting just how ignorant she truly was. Furthermore, the agent continued, her tone relentless and sharp. That specific animal is federally tracked and requires a strict United States Department of Agriculture permit to legally own. Your husband conspired with a known black market trafficking ring and transported that microchipped animal across state lines into Nevada without legal documentation. That is a direct, undeniable violation of the Lacey Act. He then used digital communication networks to facilitate the illegal sale, which constitutes federal wire fraud. Brittany stood frozen on the concrete driveway, her eyes wide with mounting horror, as the massive weight of the federal charges finally set in. He is not going to the local police station to sit in a holding cell for a few hours, the agent clarified, delivering the final crushing blow to Brittany's delusion. He is being transported to a federal detention center. Between the grand larceny, the wildlife smuggling, and the wire fraud, your husband is facing a minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. Do you understand me now? Step away from the vehicle before I charge you with obstruction. The agent turned her back, signaled to the driver, and climbed into the passenger seat of the SUV. The heavy vehicle pulled away from the curb, joining the rest of the convoy as it disappeared down the suburban street. Brittany was left standing barefoot in the cold, staring blankly at the empty space where the federal vehicles had just been parked. Her perfect mommy vlogger life had just been completely incinerated in less than 30 minutes. Her husband was going to federal prison. Her stolen electronics were seized as criminal evidence. Her father's retirement account was frozen by the IRS. She had absolutely nothing left. Slowly, Brittany turned around. Her eyes locked onto me. I was standing calmly on the front porch, leaning against the wooden railing, wearing my warm cashmere sweater, and holding a fresh cup of coffee. I did not look sorry. I did not look sympathetic. I looked entirely at peace. Something inside my sister violently snapped. The fragile illusion of her superiority shattered entirely, leaving behind nothing but pure, unadulterated rage. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She let out a primal, echoing scream and charged blindly up the driveway toward me. "You ruined my life," she roared, her hands curled into tight fists, her eyes wild with violent intent. "I am going to kill you, Rachel. I am going to tear your face off." She sprinted up the concrete steps, lunging directly at my throat. I did not panic. I simply took one calculated step backward, calmly moving out of her direct path. Brittany never even reached me. A local police officer who had been dispatched earlier to provide perimeter backup for the federal raid had been standing quietly near the side gate taking notes. The moment Brittany lunged at me with a verbal death threat, his rigorous training kicked in. He rushed forward rapidly, grabbed my sister by her shoulders, and spun her around forcefully. He swept her legs out from under her, taking her down heavily onto the hard wooden planks of the porch. "Get off me!" Brittany shrieked, thrashing wildly against the officer's heavy grip. "She is the one who did this. Arrest her!" The officer ignored her frantic screams. He pressed his knee firmly into her lower back, grabbed her flailing arms, and pulled them behind her back. I listened to the incredibly satisfying metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly around my sister's wrists. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for attempted battery and making terroristic threats," the officer stated loudly, hauling her up from the wooden floorboards. "You have the right to remain silent. Though looking at the massive mess you have made here today, I highly suggest you actually use it." The sharp click of the handcuffs echoing across the wooden porch was the final punctuation mark to my family's complete collapse. The local officer radioed for transport and walked my fiercely struggling sister down the driveway, shoving her into the back of his patrol cruiser. She spent the entire walk screaming obscenities at me, but her voice was quickly muffled by the thick glass of the police car windows. The cruiser pulled away, its red and blue lights flashing silently as it carried the golden child off to county lockup. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the sudden, overwhelming silence that fell over the property. The chaotic neighborhood spectacle was over. The onlookers slowly retreated back into their homes, shutting their blinds. I turned around and walked back inside my house. The living room was an absolute disaster zone. Furniture had been shoved aside during the raid, the front door was hanging precariously by a single splintered hinge, and empty plastic bins were scattered across the floor, where DeAndre's stolen tech had briefly resided. My parents were sitting in the dining room looking like two ghosts haunting a ruined castle. Susan was crying softly into a kitchen towel, while Richard just stared blankly at his frozen laptop screen, completely paralyzed by the reality of his financial ruin. They did not speak to me as I walked past them. They did not have the energy left to insult me or demand that I fix the mess they had created. I ignored them entirely, walked up to my master suite and quickly packed a small overnight bag. DeAndre and Brittany were facing the legal consequences of their actions, but my primary mission was still incomplete. I needed to find my cat. I checked my email on my phone. The lead agent from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service had sent me a brief encrypted message. Based on the digital dark web dossier I had forwarded to them, federal agents in Nevada had successfully located the underground exotic animal compound where DeAndre had shipped Apollo. They were preparing to raid the facility that afternoon and requested my presence to properly identify and claim my registered animal, assuming he was still alive. I called a locksmith to come secure the broken front door, booked the first available commercial flight out of Seattle, and called an Uber. I did not say goodbye to my parents when I left the house. They were no longer my concern. The flight to Las Vegas felt like it took an eternity. My mind raced with terrifying scenarios. I knew the black market exotic pet trade was notoriously brutal. Animals were often kept in deplorable conditions, drugged for transport, or quickly flipped to anonymous private buyers before authorities could intervene. I constantly prayed that the federal agents would move fast enough to intercept the trafficker before Apollo was moved again. When I landed at Harry Reid International Airport, a plainclothes federal agent was waiting for me at the arrivals terminal. He flashed his badge, introduced himself as Agent Miller, and escorted me to an unmarked black Suburban idling at the curb. "We are heading straight to the compound now," Ms. Rachel Miller said, navigating the heavy Vegas traffic with practiced ease. "Our tactical team breached the perimeter about 20 minutes ago. The main trafficker is in custody, but the property is massive. It is an old abandoned desert ranch located about 40 miles outside the city limits. They were using the outbuildings to hide the animals. It is a complete mess out there." My stomach tied itself into a painful knot. "Did they find my cat?" I asked, gripping the leather handle of my overnight bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. Miller glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "They are still sweeping the enclosures, ma'am. These smugglers try to hide the high-value assets when they know we are coming. We will know more when we get there." We drove out of the glittering city and deep into the arid, unforgiving Nevada desert. The landscape turned into a desolate expanse of cracked earth and dry brush. Eventually, we turned off the main highway onto a severely rutted dirt road. A thick cloud of dust trailed behind us as we approached a sprawling, run-down ranch surrounded by high chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The scene was chaotic. Dozens of federal vehicles were parked haphazardly around the dusty compound. Agents in tactical gear were moving rapidly between several dilapidated metal barns, carrying out various cages and securing the perimeter. I could hear the distressed sounds of dozens of different animals echoing through the dry desert air. Parrots squawking, monkeys chattering nervously, and the low, guttural growls of large wild cats. Miller parked the SUV near a mobile command center and escorted me out. "Stay close to me, Ms. Rachel," he instructed. "This is still an active crime scene." We walked past a group of handcuffed suspects sitting in the dirt under the watchful eyes of armed agents. The smell of the compound was overwhelming, a sickening mixture of animal waste, rotting meat, and dry dust. We entered the largest metal barn on the property. The interior was incredibly dim, lit only by harsh portable construction lights. Rows of rusted, cramped cages lined the walls filled with illegally imported reptiles, exotic birds, and small mammals. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. I scanned every single cage we passed, desperately looking for Apollo's familiar spotted coat. A female agent approached Miller holding a digital tablet. "We have secured the primary holding area in the back," she reported. "We found several high-value felines. We need the owner to verify the microchip number." "Follow me," Miller said, leading me toward the back of the massive barn. We stepped into a smaller climate-controlled room that had been retrofitted with heavy steel enclosures. Unlike the rusty cages in the main barn, these pens were heavily fortified, clearly designed to hold expensive, dangerous animals. I walked slowly down the row of steel cages. My breath caught in my throat. In the very last enclosure, huddled defensively in the darkest corner, was a large spotted cat. His fur was dull and dusty, and he looked terrifyingly thin, but I instantly recognized the unique pattern of rosettes on his flank. "Apollo." I whispered, my voice cracking with overwhelming emotion. The cat's large tufted ears twitched at the sound of his name. He lifted his head slowly, his bright amber eyes locking onto mine. For a second he just stared, assessing the situation. Then he let out a loud, familiar trill, a sound he only ever made when I came home from work. He stood up on shaking legs and walked toward the front of the steel bars, pressing his head against the cold metal. I dropped to my knees in the dirt, completely ignoring the federal agent standing behind me. I reached my fingers through the gaps in the heavy steel mesh, and Apollo immediately pushed his cheek against my hand, purring so loudly his entire body vibrated. Tears finally spilled down my face. Not tears of anger or betrayal, but of pure, profound relief. The female agent stepped forward with a handheld scanner. She ran the device over Apollo's shoulder blades. The scanner beeped loudly, displaying a long string of numbers on the digital screen. She checked the numbers against her tablet and nodded at Agent Miller. "It is a verified match," she confirmed. "Microchip number 884A. This is your animal, ma'am." "Thank you," I sobbed, keeping my hand firmly pressed against Apollo's fur. "Thank you so much." I knelt there on the dirty concrete floor of a Nevada smuggling compound, holding the only creature in the world that had never lied to me, never stolen from me, and never used me for financial gain. My family had tried to destroy me for their own selfish desires, but looking into Apollo's amber eyes, I knew exactly where my true loyalty belonged, and it certainly was not with the people currently sitting in jail cells back in Washington. The flight back to Washington was a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. I booked a private pet transport service to ensure Apollo traveled in the cabin with me, safe and comfortable in a spacious carrier. He slept the entire way, exhausted from his terrifying ordeal, while I sat wide awake, plotting my final moves. When the rideshare vehicle finally pulled up to my house late in the afternoon, the front lawn still bore the deep, ugly tire tracks from the federal raid. The temporary wooden barricade the local locksmith had installed over my shattered front door held firm. I carried Apollo inside, unzipped his carrier, and watched him cautiously step out to explore the living room. The house was completely silent. A quick check of the driveway and the garage confirmed my parents were gone. They were undoubtedly spending their entire day at the county courthouse, desperately trying to secure a public defender for Brittany and figuring out how to navigate the massive federal nightmare DeAndre had dropped on their heads. They left me a perfect, uninterrupted window of time to reclaim my territory. I did not waste a single second. I pulled out my phone and called a local junk removal and moving company, offering them triple their usual hourly rate for an immediate emergency dispatch. Within 45 minutes, a large box truck backed into my driveway. 4 burly men wearing thick work gloves stepped out ready to work. I also called a premium security firm and requested a senior technician to come out and completely overhaul every single point of entry on my property. I led the moving crew upstairs and pointed to the master suite and the 2 guest bedrooms. I handed them several rolls of the cheapest, thinnest black plastic garbage bags I could find in my kitchen pantry. I told them to pack everything that did not belong to me. I watched with absolute cold satisfaction as they shoved Brittany's expensive pastel lounge clothes, her ridiculous influencer ring lights, and her high-end makeup palettes into the flimsy trash bags. They tossed DeAndre's remaining cheap cologne, his crypto investment magazines, and his gaudy designer sneakers in, right on top of her things. In the guest rooms, my parents' carefully folded clothes, my mother's silk scarves, and my father's expensive golf shoes met the exact same fate. There was no care taken, there was no respect given to their personal items, just like they had shown absolutely zero respect for mine and for my beloved pet. The crew worked incredibly fast. Bag after bulging bag was hauled down the stairs and dragged out to the front yard. I instructed them to pile the black plastic garbage bags right in the middle of the ruined grass directly on top of the federal tire tracks. It looked like a literal mountain of trash. By the time they were finished, the bedrooms were completely stripped bare. I paid the men in cash, thanked them for their efficiency, and watched them drive away. As soon as the movers left, the security technician arrived. He removed every standard deadbolt on the front door, the back patio, and the garage entrance, replacing them with heavy-duty military-grade smart locks. These new locks required a biometric fingerprint scan and a complex numerical passcode to open. There were no physical keys that could be copied, hidden, or stolen. He also installed reinforced steel strike plates on the door frames to prevent anyone from kicking them in again. I synced the entire system to an application on my phone, allowing me to monitor the high-definition cameras and control every door from the palm of my hand. The house was now an impenetrable fortress. I locked the front door, made myself a cup of herbal tea, and sat on the living room sofa with Apollo purring loudly on my lap. I opened the security camera feed on my tablet and waited. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long dark shadows across the front yard when my parents' sedan finally turned onto the street. The car pulled into the driveway and came to an abrupt halt right in front of the massive pile of garbage bags. The car doors flew open. Richard and Susan stepped out looking completely exhausted and 10 years older than they had just the day before. The back door opened and Brittany emerged. She was no longer wearing her perfect influencer makeup. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her face was puffy and red from crying in a county holding cell, and she looked utterly defeated. The reality of having a fresh criminal record for attempted battery was clearly weighing heavily on her. But their exhaustion instantly vanished the moment they realized what the mountain of black plastic bags actually was. Susan let out a horrified gasp and ran over to a bag that had ripped open, exposing her favorite cashmere sweater covered in driveway dirt. Brittany shrieked frantically, digging through a bag that contained her tangled recording equipment, wailing that her expensive lenses were scratched. Richard marched furiously up the concrete steps to the front porch. He grabbed the doorknob and twisted violently, but the heavy smart lock did not even budge. He pounded his fist against the reinforced door, yelling my name at the top of his lungs. He demanded that I open the door immediately and explain what was going on. I did not get up from the sofa. I simply pressed the microphone button on my tablet, connecting my voice directly to the smart doorbell speaker mounted on the porch. My voice rang out clear and cold across the front yard, freezing all three of them in their tracks. "Your 30-day eviction notice technically expires tomorrow at midnight," I announced, watching Richard jump back from the speaker in surprise. However, my legal counsel advised me that since your husband used my residential address to facilitate a federal felony, and my sister was arrested for violent assault on my property, I am legally within my rights to terminate your residency immediately due to criminal activity. Your belongings are on the lawn. My property is secure. If any of you step foot on my porch again, the police will be called for criminal trespassing. Have a safe drive. Richard stood frozen on the concrete porch, his fist still raised in the air from pounding on my reinforced door. His mouth opened and closed silently as he tried to process the absolute finality in my voice. He looked down at the heavy smart lock, realizing that his usual tactics of bullying and shouting were completely useless against cold, hard steel. Susan began to weep loudly, her shoulders shaking as she collapsed against the hood of their parked sedan. She stared at the mountain of black plastic bags in the driveway, mourning her expensive wardrobe instead of reflecting on her massive failures as a mother. But Brittany did not cry. The sheer humiliation of being locked out, combined with the incredible stress of her husband's federal arrest and her own recent stint in a county holding cell, completely fractured whatever fragile sanity she had left. The logical part of her brain simply shut down. She refused to accept that she had lost the war. She let out a guttural, terrifying scream that echoed down the quiet street. She kicked a garbage bag so hard it split wide open, spilling her designer shoes and expensive makeup palettes across the dirty concrete. Then she stomped deliberately toward the wooden side gate. I watched her erratic movements on my tablet screen from the safety of my living room sofa. Apollo was curled up warmly beside me, completely unbothered by the drama outside. The new high-definition security cameras tracked her perfectly seamlessly, switching to crisp night vision as she shoved the heavy wooden gate open and marched into my dark backyard. Richard finally found his voice. "Rachel, open this door right now," he yelled at the front porch camera, pounding his flat palm against the reinforced wood. "You cannot do this to your own family. We have no money. We have absolutely nowhere to go tonight. You have to let us inside to figure this out." I completely ignored his pathetic begging and focused all my attention on the backyard camera feed. Brittany was pacing frantically across the brick patio. She looked up at the large sliding glass door that led directly into my kitchen. She noticed the glowing keypad of the new smart lock, realizing she could not just slide it open like she used to. A dark, destructive look washed over her face. She marched over to the decorative garden bed and picked up a massive, heavy landscaping rock. The 4K resolution of the camera system was absolutely incredible. It captured every single detail of her unhinged state perfectly. It recorded every vein popping out of her neck, every smudge of ruined mascara running down her cheeks, and the absolute manic glare in her wild eyes. It was a flawless, undeniable digital record that was already being backed up in real time to my secure off-site cloud server. She lifted the heavy rock high above her head, her muscles straining under the weight. She swung her arms down viciously, slamming the rough stone directly against the center of the sliding glass door. The impact made a deafening crack. However, the heavy-duty security film the technician had installed earlier that afternoon did its job perfectly. The pane of glass did not shatter into a million dangerous pieces. Instead, it held firmly together, though a massive opaque spiderweb of cracks bloomed across the entire surface. Brittany let out a frustrated, animalistic growl, adjusted her grip on the heavy rock, and raised it above her shoulder to strike the damaged glass a second time. I did not wait for the glass to give way. I pressed the microphone icon corresponding to the backyard camera feed. "That is felony destruction of private property," I said, my voice projecting loudly and clearly over the patio through the crisp night air. Brittany froze instantly. The heavy stone hovered dangerously just above her shoulder. She glared frantically around the dark yard, her eyes darting back and forth as she tried to locate the hidden speaker. "Drop the rock right now, Brittany," I commanded, keeping my tone completely calm and devoid of any fear. "And listen very carefully to what I am about to tell you. While you were sitting in a dirty county holding cell this morning, and while Mom and Dad were desperately begging a public defender to take your criminal case, I was busy speaking with a family court judge." She slowly lowered the rock to her chest, her breathing heavy and ragged in the cold air. "I showed the judge the official police report from this morning," I continued smoothly. "The one where you explicitly threatened to murder me and then violently attempted to physically assault me in my own driveway. Because of that documented threat of violence and your subsequent arrest for attempted battery, the judge immediately granted a permanent emergency restraining order." Brittany stared directly into the camera lens, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief as my words finally registered in her frantic mind. "You are legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me or my residence," I stated, reading the exact parameters of the legal document sitting on my coffee table. "By standing on that patio right now, you are currently trespassing, destroying private property, and directly violating a court order." "You are lying!" she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of intense rage and rising terror. "You did not have time to get a restraining order. You are just trying to scare me away." "I never bluff," I replied softly. I did not need to say another word to prove my point. Piercing through the quiet suburban night, the distinct high-pitched wail of police sirens began to echo clearly in the distance. The sharp sound cut through the cold air, and the sirens were getting rapidly closer to my street. I had triggered a silent panic alarm the exact moment their sedan pulled into my driveway. Richard and Susan heard the sirens from the front yard. Richard sprinted through the side gate, his face pale with sheer panic. He grabbed Brittany forcefully by the arm, roughly yanking the heavy landscaping rock out of her hand and letting it drop onto the brick patio with a loud thud. "We have to go right now," Richard screamed, pulling her violently toward the front yard. "Get in the car. If you get arrested again tonight, they will completely deny your bail." Brittany tried to resist, her eyes glued with pure hatred to the cracked glass of my back door, but the deafening sound of the approaching sirens finally broke through her stubborn rage. The three of them scrambled blindly through the dark yard. They stumbled over the massive pile of black garbage bags in the driveway, completely abandoning everything they owned because they simply did not have the time to load the trunk. They threw themselves into the cramped sedan, the tires screeching loudly against the concrete as Richard slammed his foot desperately on the gas pedal. I watched through the front security cameras as they sped away dangerously into the darkness, fleeing their own daughter's property exactly like common criminals. The flashing red and blue lights of two patrol cruisers rounded the corner just seconds later, illuminating the mountain of trash they had left behind. The flashing red and blue lights of two patrol cruisers rounded the corner just seconds later, illuminating the mountain of trash they had left behind. The officers exited their vehicles, shining their heavy-duty flashlights over the scattered garbage bags and the cracked sliding glass door of my patio. I spoke to them through the outdoor speaker, explaining that the trespassers had already fled the scene. I remotely unlocked the side gate so they could inspect the damage and emailed them the high-definition video footage of Brittany attacking the glass. They took their report and left, assuring me that if my sister showed her face anywhere near the property again, she would be going straight back to a concrete cell without bail. I finally turned off the porch lights, locked my tablet, and went upstairs to sleep. For the first time in months, I did not have to listen to DeAndre yelling at his video games or my parents complaining about the temperature of the house. It was just me and Apollo, safe and secure. While I slept peacefully, my family was experiencing a completely different reality. They had managed to scrape together enough loose cash to rent a single room at a cheap, rundown motel located directly off the loud interstate highway. I knew exactly where they were because Brittany simply could not resist the desperate urge to seek validation from strangers on the internet. Around 2 in the morning, she posted a brand new video. I saw it the next morning while sipping my fresh coffee. The setting of her video was absolutely pitiful. She was sitting on a stained floral bedspread, the flickering neon sign of the motel buzzing aggressively through the thin window blinds behind her. She had intentionally reapplied her makeup just to smudge it again, ensuring she looked appropriately traumatized for the camera. "Hey guys," she whispered into the lens, her voice quivering with perfectly manufactured terror. "My sister completely snapped tonight. She packed all of our belongings in garbage bags and locked us out in the freezing cold. She even smashed her own back door and called the police, trying to frame me for it. We are hiding in this terrifying motel right now because we have nowhere else to go. She is trying to destroy my family. Please keep sharing our story. We need your support now more than ever." She expected the exact same massive wave of sympathy she had received the day before. She expected her loyal followers to rally behind her and continue sending death threats to my employer. But she had severely underestimated the speed, intelligence, and ruthlessness of the internet. Just 1 hour before Brittany uploaded her tearful motel room video, the local news station had aired their primetime morning broadcast. It was a slow news week in our area, making the dramatic federal raid on a quiet suburban street their top headline story. The anchor looked directly into the camera and announced that a local man had been arrested by the FBI and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. The screen instantly cut to a high-resolution photograph of DeAndre's fresh federal mugshot. He looked absolutely terrified, his eyes wide, and his trademark arrogant smirk completely wiped away. The news anchor read the official press release on live television, detailing how DeAndre was the key suspect in an interstate exotic animal smuggling ring. They specifically mentioned that he had stolen an $18,000 microchipped F1 Savannah cat from a family member and sold it to a dark web trafficker in Nevada. They even showed cell phone footage captured by a neighbor depicting the armored vehicles tearing up my front lawn and federal agents carrying out his shiny new gaming computer as seized criminal evidence. It took the internet sleuths exactly 15 minutes to connect the dots. Someone recognized the front of my house from the news broadcast and matched it perfectly to the background of Britney's original viral video. Someone else dug into the public arrest records from the county jail, proudly posting the documentation that showed Britney herself had been arrested for attempted battery just hours before checking into that cheap motel. The narrative shifted with violent, unstoppable speed. I sat at my kitchen island and watched the absolute destruction of her digital empire unfold in real time. People began stitching her crying motel video with the news broadcast of DeAndre's mugshot. The comments section under her post, which had previously been filled with prayers and blind support, instantly transformed into a massive wall of absolute disgust and outrage. "You are married to an animal abuser and a federal smuggler," one top comment read, garnering tens of thousands of likes in minutes. "You let him steal your own sister's cat to buy iPhones, and now you are playing the victim." Another user pointed out her blatant lies, writing, "Your sister did not smash the door. You literally got arrested for assault yesterday. Enjoy the cheap motel, you absolute scammer." Brittany completely panicked. I could see her desperately trying to delete the negative comments, but they were pouring in by the thousands, faster than she could swipe. She tried to turn the comments off, but users simply took the video to other platforms, tagging her directly on Twitter and Instagram to make sure she saw their anger. Her phone must have been vibrating continuously as the digital mob she had so eagerly weaponized against me turned around and devoured her instead. Then came the severe financial consequences. Brittany had recently secured a lucrative brand deal with a popular organic baby food company. They had sent her thousands of dollars in advance to promote their products on her channel. As the news of her husband's federal animal smuggling charges and her own violent arrest went viral, the company's public relations team went into rapid damage control. They posted an official statement on their corporate page explicitly cutting all ties with Brittany, demanding their advance payment back, and strongly condemning animal cruelty. Two other smaller sponsors followed suit within the hour. Her entire influencer income completely vanished before lunchtime. The final fatal blow was delivered by the platform itself. Thousands of angry users mass-reported her account for targeted harassment, bullying, and promoting illegal activities. As I refreshed her page to see the latest wave of comments, her profile picture suddenly disappeared. The screen went blank, replaced by a standard gray error message. Account banned due to multiple violations of community guidelines. She was gone. Her 200,000 followers, her precious daily validation, her primary source of income, all of it was permanently erased from the internet. She had tried to use social media as a weapon to force me into submission and ruin my career. But the recoil had blown up squarely in her own face. She was now sitting in a cheap motel room with no home, a frozen bank account, a husband in federal lockup, and a permanently ruined reputation. I woke up the next morning feeling more rested than I had in years. I was in my kitchen pouring a second cup of premium dark roast coffee and watching Apollo happily chase a laser pointer across the pristine living room rug when my cell phone buzzed violently on the granite counter. It was an urgent email from the Human Resources Department at my corporate firm. The subject line was highlighted in red and requested an immediate in-person meeting at the downtown headquarters. Despite the stressful nature of my current unpaid administrative leave, I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I knew exactly what this meeting was about. My mother, Susan, was a woman who operated purely on spite and toxic vindictiveness when backed into a corner. I calmly finished my coffee, fed Apollo his expensive wet food, and went upstairs to get dressed for the occasion. I bypassed my usual comfortable work attire and chose a sharp, tailored navy blue power suit and my best black leather heels. I packed my leather briefcase meticulously, ensuring every single document was perfectly aligned, and drove downtown to the towering glass high-rise where my company was headquartered. When I walked into the massive glass-walled conference room on the 20th floor, the atmosphere was incredibly thick with tension. Sitting at the long mahogany table was David, my regional director, and Brenda, the senior head of corporate human resources. Neither of them smiled or offered a warm greeting when I sat down in the plush leather chair across from them. "Rachel, thank you for coming in so quickly this morning." Brenda began folding her hands tightly on the polished wooden table. "We need to discuss a highly concerning development regarding your administrative leave. Over the past 48 hours, our corporate switchboard has been completely inundated with erratic and deeply disturbing phone calls." David sighed heavily, looking incredibly stressed and sleep-deprived. "A woman claiming to be your mother, Susan, has left over 30 frantic voicemails on my direct office line. She has also called our public relations department and our legal team multiple times. She is explicitly claiming that you are currently under police investigation for felony property destruction, elder abuse, and violent domestic assault. She stated that you are a dangerous, unstable criminal who locked her family out in the freezing cold winter, and that employing you is a massive legal liability for this firm's reputation." I listened quietly, keeping my facial expression completely neutral and utterly unfazed. Susan had realized she could no longer physically intimidate me or use Brittany's social media followers to ruin my life, so she resorted to the oldest trick in her manipulative playbook. She was trying to completely destroy my primary source of financial independence. She genuinely thought that if she cost me my high-paying corporate job, I would eventually be forced to crawl back to them and beg for forgiveness. Brenda leaned forward, her expression grave and serious. "Rachel, we deeply value your work here, but we are a high-level data privacy firm handling multi-million-dollar healthcare contracts. Absolute integrity is our entire business model. If you are involved in any criminal investigations or violent domestic disputes, we have absolutely no choice but to terminate your employment immediately. We need you to be completely honest with us right now. Are you under police investigation?" I looked at Brenda, then over at David. "No, I am absolutely not under investigation," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and professional. "However, my family certainly is." I reached into my leather briefcase, popped open the brass latches, and pulled out 3 thick, professionally bound folders. I slid the first folder across the smooth mahogany table toward David. "That is a copy of the official federal press release from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, along with a certified copy of the federal indictment," I explained calmly. "My brother-in-law DeAndre was arrested by federal agents yesterday morning on my front lawn. He is currently sitting in a federal holding facility facing up to 5 years in prison for violating the Lacey Act, felony wildlife smuggling, and interstate wire fraud. He stole my registered $18,000 exotic cat and sold it to a dark web trafficker in Nevada." David's eyes widened in sheer shock as he scanned the official federal seals and the detailed criminal charges on the documents. He looked up at me, completely speechless. I slid the second folder across the table toward Brenda. "That is a copy of an official Internal Revenue Service asset freeze notification," I continued. "While investigating the theft of my animal, I utilized my forensic data auditing skills to track the suspect's network traffic. I discovered he was using my father's social security number to hide hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal cryptocurrency gains. I reported the tax evasion directly to the federal government. My parents are currently completely bankrupt and under a massive federal tax investigation." Brenda picked up the folder, her hands actually trembling slightly as she read the undeniable legal proof of my family's incredible criminality. Finally, I slid the third folder directly into the center of the table. "And that is a copy of the permanent emergency restraining order granted to me by a family court judge last night," I said, tapping the heavy paper with my manicured fingernail. "It is accompanied by a local police report confirming that my sister Brittany was arrested for attempted battery and making terroristic threats against me on my own property. My mother is calling your office, making wild accusations because I legally evicted them for committing federal felonies inside my home. They are angry, desperate, and entirely broke." The silence in the conference room was absolute. The heavy corporate tension had completely evaporated, replaced by profound awe and shock. Neither David nor Brenda could formulate a proper sentence. They just stared at the mountain of undeniable legal evidence sitting between us. The heavy oak door to the conference room suddenly opened. Our chief executive officer, an older man named Mr. Campbell, who rarely intervened in lower-level employee disputes, walked into the room. He had been listening to the meeting through the open intercom line in his adjacent corner office. He walked straight up to the table, completely ignoring the empty chairs, and looked directly at me. "Rachel," Mr. Campbell said, his voice carrying a tone of absolute respect. "You tracked an encrypted dark web wildlife smuggler and uncovered a massive federal tax fraud scheme using nothing but your home internet router logs and sheer determination." "Yes, sir," I replied simply, holding his gaze. The CEO shook his head in pure disbelief, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. "I want to personally apologize to you on behalf of this entire corporation for placing you on administrative leave based on the manic phone calls of a desperate woman. Your suspension is lifted immediately. You will receive full back pay for the time you missed, along with a formal written apology in your permanent employee file." "Thank you, sir," I said, maintaining my professional composure. But the CEO was not finished. He leaned over the mahogany table, looking at the federal indictments I had provided. "Furthermore, we are currently expanding our corporate cybersecurity division. We desperately need someone who can track hidden financial assets and secure digital networks with the absolute ruthless efficiency you just demonstrated today. Effective Monday morning, I am promoting you to Senior Director of Forensic Auditing. It comes with a massive pay raise and your own dedicated team." I walked out of that corporate high-rise feeling entirely invincible. Susan had tried to fire the final bullet to destroy my livelihood, but all she did was hand me the exact ammunition I needed to prove my absolute brilliance to the highest level of my company. My career was now completely bulletproof. But the legal bloodbath surrounding my family was only just beginning. Exactly 3 days after my triumphant meeting with the corporate executives, Friday morning arrived. It was the scheduled date for DeAndre's initial federal arraignment and bail hearing. I requested the morning off from my newly acquired position as Senior Director of Forensic Auditing, dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit, and drove downtown to the United States District Courthouse in Seattle. I did not go to offer support. I went to ensure the ledger was finally and permanently balanced. The federal courthouse was an imposing structure of cold white marble and towering glass windows. I passed through the rigorous metal detectors, showed my identification, and quietly slipped into the back row of the designated courtroom. I took a seat in the dark oak pews, making sure I was partially obscured by a thick wooden pillar. 10 minutes later, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Richard, Susan, and Brittany walked down the center aisle. I almost did not recognize them. The physical toll of the last few days was absolutely staggering. My father, who always prided himself on his immaculate tailored suits and country club posture, looked completely broken. He was wearing a wrinkled dress shirt that clearly had not been ironed, his shoulders slumped as if gravity itself was trying to pull him into the floor. Susan walked beside him with a hollow, vacant stare. Her expensive salon blowout was gone, her hair pulled back into a messy, uneven clip. But Brittany looked the worst of all. The former glamorous mommy vlogger was practically vibrating with severe paranoia. She kept looking over her shoulder, her eyes darting around the room. She was wearing cheap sweatpants and a massive oversized hoodie, desperately trying to hide from the public eye after her spectacular digital downfall. They took their seats in the second row directly behind the defense table. They did not notice me sitting silently in the back. The heavy wooden door next to the judge's bench opened, and the bailiff instructed everyone to rise. The federal judge took his seat, a stern man who looked like he had zero tolerance for nonsense. A moment later, a side door opened, and 2 armed United States Marshals escorted DeAndre into the courtroom. The sight of him was genuinely jarring. The arrogant, chest-puffing crypto king who had threatened to smash my computer and spit on my rug was entirely gone. He was wearing an oversized, bright orange federal jumpsuit. His wrists were secured in heavy steel handcuffs attached to a thick belly chain, and his ankles were shackled together. The metallic clinking of his chains echoed loudly in the silent room with every short, shuffling step he took. He looked incredibly small, terrifyingly pale, and entirely defeated. He did not even glance back at his wife or his in-laws as he was guided to the defense table. The proceedings began swiftly. The judge read the formal federal charges aloud. Violation of the Lacey Act, conspiracy to traffic regulated wildlife, and multiple counts of interstate wire fraud. DeAndre entered a barely audible plea of not guilty. His court-appointed public defender immediately stood up to argue for bail. He claimed DeAndre was a dedicated family man with 3 young children, a resident of Washington state, and a first-time federal offender. He argued that DeAndre was not a flight risk and requested a reasonable bail amount so he could return to his family to prepare for trial. I watched the back of my father's head. Richard leaned forward, gripping the wooden bench tightly, desperately hoping the judge would grant an amount he might somehow beg or borrow from a distant relative. Then the lead federal prosecutor stood up and approached the podium. "Your Honor, the government fiercely opposes bail in any amount," the prosecutor stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The defendant is not only a severe flight risk who utilizes untraceable cryptocurrency networks, but he has also demonstrated a complete willingness to manipulate, defraud, and destroy his own family members to protect his criminal enterprise. The prosecutor paused, shuffling a thick stack of papers on his podium. He looked directly at the judge. "Furthermore, Your Honor, the government respectfully submits that the defendant has already begun cooperating with federal authorities. During his initial interrogation yesterday afternoon, the defendant explicitly offered to turn state's evidence to significantly reduce his impending sentence." A collective sharp intake of breath swept through the gallery. Brittany sat bolt upright, her hands clutching the wooden pew in front of her. In exchange for leniency, the prosecutor continued smoothly. The defendant provided sworn affidavits and digital login credentials directly implicating his father-in-law, Richard, in a massive tax evasion and identity fraud scheme. The defendant claims that Richard fully authorized the use of his Social Security number to bypass federal banking regulations and actively took a 30% cut of all illegal cryptocurrency profits. "We have submitted the signed confession to the Internal Revenue Service for immediate criminal prosecution." Richard let out a strangled, breathless gasp. He grabbed his chest, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. Susan shrieked loudly, completely ignoring the decorum of the federal courtroom. But the prosecutor was not finished. He turned a page in his file and looked mercilessly toward the gallery. The defendant also provided decrypted chat logs from a secure messaging application. These logs definitively prove that his wife Brittany was entirely aware of the exotic animal smuggling operation. She actively researched dark web transport logistics and explicitly coordinated the purchase of expensive electronics to rapidly launder the illicit cash on the day of the theft. The government is currently preparing secondary arrest warrants for conspiracy and money laundering. The courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. DeAndre had realized he was sinking, and instead of going down alone, he had tied a heavy concrete block to the ankles of his golden wife and his enabling father-in-law. He threw them completely under the bus to shave a few years off his own miserable sentence. "You lying coward!" Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, launching herself forward toward the defense table. "He forced me to do it. He is a liar." Richard jumped up, his face twisted in pure rage, pointing a shaking finger at DeAndre. "I never took a dime of that money. You stole my identity, you absolute parasite. I will kill you." The judge aggressively banged his wooden gavel, shouting for order in his courtroom. The bailiff rushed forward, ordering everyone to sit down immediately. But the Golden family could no longer maintain their fragile alliance. They turned on each other, instantly snarling and casting vicious blame like starved wolves fighting over a scrap of rotten meat. Susan screamed at DeAndre, Brittany screamed at Susan for not paying the bail, and Richard screamed at the prosecutor. As the chaotic shouting reached a fever pitch, 2 heavily armed federal marshals stepped swiftly from the side of the room directly into the gallery aisle. They did not move toward the defense table to secure DeAndre. They walked straight up the steps, stopping directly at the row where my ruined family was sitting. "Sir, ma'am," the taller marshal said, his voice cutting cleanly through the hysterical screaming. He placed a heavy hand firmly on Richard's trembling shoulder, while the other marshal stepped directly in front of Brittany. "We need you both to step out into the hallway immediately. Federal investigators have some very serious questions regarding these newly sworn affidavits." I watched from the shadows of the back row as the two federal marshals escorted Richard and Brittany out of the wooden pews. The absolute humiliation was palpable as they were marched down the center aisle of the courtroom. The gallery whispered and pointed, fully aware they were witnessing the real-time destruction of a criminal conspiracy. Susan followed closely behind them, wailing uncontrollably, completely ignoring the judge banging his wooden gavel to restore order. I stayed seated completely unseen, watching the beautiful consequences of their own toxic actions unfold. I decided I had seen enough. The ledger was balancing itself perfectly. I gathered my coat and my leather briefcase, exited through the heavy rear doors, and walked down the quiet marble corridors of the federal courthouse. I took the elevator down to the underground parking garage, ready to return to my peaceful home and my newly promoted corporate position. The parking garage was damp, dimly lit, and echoed heavily with the sound of distant city traffic. I walked steadily toward my parked sedan, my keys jingling softly in my hand. I was looking forward to a quiet evening with Apollo. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a massive concrete pillar, completely blocking my path to the driver's side door. It was my mother, Susan. She must have bolted from the interrogation rooms upstairs the moment she realized Richard and Brittany were not coming back out anytime soon. She looked absolutely wretched. The immaculate, judgmental woman who had constantly criticized my every life choice was completely gone. Her clothes were heavily wrinkled, her expensive makeup was completely washed away by frantic tears, and she was shivering visibly in the cool, damp air of the underground garage. "Rachel!" she gasped, running clumsily toward me. She closed the distance between us before I could even unlock my car doors. She did not yell. She did not demand anything with her usual entitled arrogance. Instead, she did something I had never seen her do in my entire 33 years of life. Susan's knees buckled. She collapsed entirely onto the hard, dirty concrete of the parking garage, landing directly at my feet. She reached out with trembling hands and grabbed the fabric of my tailored navy blue suit trousers. "Please, Rachel," she sobbed, her voice a pathetic, broken wheeze echoing in the empty garage. "Please help us. They have your father in a small concrete room upstairs. The federal agents are telling him he is going to be indicted for major tax fraud. They are aggressively interrogating Brittany about international smuggling rings. They are treating my family like hardened criminals. We have absolutely nothing left. The government froze every single bank account we have. We cannot even buy food tonight, let alone hire a legal defense team. The public defender told us federal cases require specialized defense attorneys that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to retain. You are the only one with any money left. You just got your job back. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. You have to pay for a lawyer to save your father." I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at her hands desperately clutching my expensive clothes. I felt absolutely no pity for her. I felt no familial obligation whatsoever. I carefully reached down and pried her trembling fingers off my trousers, stepping back to create a clear physical boundary between us. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream at her the way she had screamed at me when she threatened to disown me just a few days ago. I simply opened my leather briefcase, reached inside, and pulled out a single sheet of premium printer paper. "Stand up, Susan," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional warmth. She slowly struggled to her feet, wiping her running nose with the back of her trembling hand. She looked at the piece of paper in my grasp with a sudden spark of desperate hope. She probably thought it was a blank check. She probably thought her theatrical display of maternal suffering had successfully guilt-tripped me into opening my wallet to save her husband. I handed her the paper. It was not a check. It was a highly detailed, perfectly formatted financial spreadsheet. I am a forensic auditor. I track numbers for a living, and I keep meticulous records of everything. "Look closely at the bottom right corner of the page," I instructed her calmly. "That bold number is the exact total of every single dollar I have spent keeping this family afloat over the last 4 years. I paid $3,000 every single month for the mortgage on the house you all lived in, rent-free. I spent $800 a month on premium groceries because you refused to eat generic brands. I paid the utility bills, the high-speed internet you use to watch television, and the massive water bill for your long, luxurious showers. Susan stared at the spreadsheet, her eyes darting frantically over the meticulously itemized columns. I pointed to a specific section highlighted in bright yellow ink. And those are the generous loans I gave DeAndre. I continued, my tone icy and precise. $7,000 for his failed real estate course. $5,000 for a crypto mining rig he broke in 2 weeks. Another $4,000 when Brittany maxed out her credit cards buying designer baby clothes for her internet videos. If you add it all up, this family has extracted over $200,000 from my personal bank accounts. You have been living a lavish, comfortable life, entirely subsidized by the daughter you constantly insulted, belittled, and treated like an unwanted burden. But Rachel Susan cried, shaking the paper wildly in the damp air. That is all in the past. We are talking about your father going to federal prison today. We need cash right now to retain a legal team. You owe us. We raised you. You cannot just abandon us when we are facing total destruction. I do not owe you a single cent, I replied, unlocking my car doors with a sharp electronic beep. You chose to back a lying, stealing parasite over your own flesh and blood. You watched DeAndre spit on my floor. You told me my $18,000 cat was just an animal and that I needed to get over it. You threw a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate my misery. You made your choices, and now the federal government is handing you the final bill. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the comfortable leather seat. Susan stepped forward, her face twisting in sheer panic as she realized I was actually going to leave her standing alone in the cold garage. How are we supposed to pay for a lawyer? She wailed, fresh tears streaming down her face. How are we supposed to survive this? I started the engine. The powerful hum of the motor filled the space between us. I rolled down the window just enough to deliver my final piece of advice. You sold an $18,000 cat for iPhones, I said coldly. You can sell the iPhones for a lawyer. I pressed the button to roll up the window, cutting off her hysterical screaming. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking space. I drove away, leaving my mother standing alone in the damp underground garage, clutching a spreadsheet of her own financial sins. By Monday morning, the fallout from the federal arraignment had escalated from a bitter family feud into an absolute legal bloodbath. Brittany, having spent the entire weekend huddled in a cheap roadside motel room with our terrified parents, realized the federal government was rapidly closing in on her. The threat of secondary arrest warrants mentioned by the prosecutor in open court was not a bluff, and the reality of facing a federal judge had finally shattered her delusions. So true to her incredibly selfish nature, my sister decided to save her own skin by offering up the father of her 3 children as a sacrificial lamb. She officially filed for divorce. I found out about the divorce filing through a highly publicized press release issued by a cheap local attorney she had somehow convinced to take her case on a contingency basis. Brittany was attempting to construct a desperate fictional narrative to save herself from prison. Her lawyer claimed she was a terrified victim of severe financial and emotional abuse at the hands of DeAndre. According to her new fabricated story, she had absolutely no idea he was involved in international wildlife smuggling or federal tax evasion. She painted him as a deceptive, violent criminal mastermind and insisted she genuinely thought the brand new iPhones and the massive gaming computer were simply generous gifts purchased from his legitimate cryptocurrency trading profits. The press release her lawyer put out was a masterpiece of manipulation. It stated that Brittany was a devoted homemaker who lived in constant fear of her husband's erratic temper. It claimed she never questioned his finances because she was entirely focused on raising their children in a hostile environment. She demanded full legal custody, exclusive rights to any remaining untainted bank accounts, and officially requested that the federal court grant her total immunity in exchange for her full cooperation in prosecuting DeAndre to the fullest extent of the law. She thought she could just cry in front of a judge, sign some divorce papers, and walk away completely unscathed, leaving DeAndre to rot in a federal penitentiary for the next decade. She genuinely believed her carefully curated facade of naive innocence would protect her from the United States Department of Justice. But she forgot one crucial detail about the man she married. DeAndre was just as vindictive and ruthless as she was, and his court-appointed public defender was fighting aggressively to secure him a favorable plea deal. When DeAndre's public defender brought him the divorce filing in the federal holding center, DeAndre reportedly flew into a violent, screaming rage. The fragile alliance of their toxic marriage disintegrated instantly. DeAndre realized his wife was attempting to secure an immunity deal that would guarantee him the maximum possible prison sentence while she walked away completely free to play the victim on the internet. He immediately directed his lawyer to the one piece of evidence he knew could destroy her pristine narrative and drag her down into the cell right next to him. He pointed them directly to my network logs. DeAndre's public defender immediately filed a motion to subpoena the decrypted router logs from my home network. I did not have to fight the subpoena or step foot in a courtroom to testify. I had already legally surrendered the entire encrypted digital dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation during the initial raid on my house. The federal prosecutors simply opened the massive file I had handed them on a silver platter and ran a deep forensic analysis on the specific media access control address registered to Brittany's old cell phone. As a senior data privacy auditor, I had not just collected the surface-level browser history of the people living in my house. My custom network architecture captured every single packet of data that flowed through the wireless router. Even though Brittany had used incognito mode and secure browsing applications on her phone, the router still logged the destination, IP addresses, the timestamps, and the encrypted search queries. When the Federal Cyber Division processed the digital dossier, they successfully isolated her device's unique identifier and reconstructed her exact digital footprint. What they found was a digital goldmine of premeditated criminal intent. The logs completely shattered her naive, abused wife narrative. The evidence was incredibly damning because it proved absolute premeditation. 22 days before I ever packed my bags for my corporate audit trip to Chicago, Brittany's phone queried the exact market value of an adult-registered F1 Savannah cat. 14 days before the theft, she spent 3 uninterrupted hours on a dark web forum reading detailed threads about anonymous exotic animal couriers. The logs showed she had actively searched for underground exotic pet buyers operating specifically in the Nevada desert. 5 days before the theft, she explicitly searched for ways to disable or scramble a federal tracking microchip using heavy household magnets. She was not an innocent bystander who was surprised by her husband's sudden criminal windfall. She was the primary architect of the entire theft. She had done the research, found the buyer, and coordinated the logistics, while DeAndre was simply the arrogant muscle who executed the physical transaction and collected the cash. She had planned to sell my beloved pet to fund her ridiculous influencer lifestyle long before I ever left the state. The federal prosecutors did not waste a single second with this new, undeniable evidence. On Wednesday afternoon, Brittany was sitting in the small lobby of her cheap divorce attorney's office. She was sipping a sparkling water, completely confident that her divorce strategy was working flawlessly and that she was about to sign her official victim statement. Instead, the glass front doors of the office swung open, and 3 armed federal agents walked inside. They did not care about her pending divorce filing or her perfectly practiced tears. When the agents walked in, she actually stood up and smiled, assuming they were there to escort her to a meeting to testify against her husband. Her confident smile vanished the exact moment the lead agent presented her with a federal arrest warrant. She was formally indicted by a federal grand jury for conspiracy to traffic regulated wildlife accessory to interstate wire fraud and obstruction of justice for lying to federal investigators in her sworn affidavits. The agent coldly informed her that her digital footprint had completely contradicted her victim narrative. She screamed for her lawyer to do something, but the cheap attorney simply backed away with his hands raised, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a federal conspiracy charge. The agents pulled her arms behind her back and placed the heavy steel handcuffs on her wrists, right there in the waiting room. The cold reality finally crashed down upon her. There was no social media audience left to manipulate. There were no parents with money to bail her out. She traded her pastel lounge clothes for a bright orange jumpsuit. Her divorce papers were completely worthless, and her desperate attempt to betray her husband had only successfully secured her a bunk in the exact same federal detention center. While Brittany and DeAndre were busy trading accusations behind heavy steel doors, my parents were rapidly running out of options on the outside. The cheap motel they had retreated to was a temporary Band-Aid, and that Band-Aid was violently ripped off when the manager knocked on their door, demanding another week of payment in advance. Richard confidently handed over his platinum credit card, only to watch the manager run it through the machine and shake his head. It was completely declined. Richard tried a second card, then a third. All declined. The Internal Revenue Service does not merely freeze your checking accounts when investigating massive identity theft and wire fraud. They place hard federal liens on every single line of credit, attached to a fraudulent Social Security number. My parents were completely and utterly bankrupt, and to avoid sleeping on a public park bench, Richard was forced to swallow the last remaining shred of his pride. He drove his beloved luxury sedan to a shady independent used car dealership on the edge of the city. He handed over the keys to the vehicle he loved more than his own daughter, and walked away with a modest stack of physical cash, receiving only a fraction of its actual Kelley Blue Book value. They used that small stack of cash to purchase a dilapidated, rusted, single-wide mobile home in a notoriously dangerous trailer park 2 towns over. The transition from my pristine, temperature-controlled suburban house to a cramped, drafty tin can was a brutal shock to their entitled systems. The trailer park was a grim wasteland of overgrown weeds, feral stray cats, and the constant hum of the nearby industrial freight train tracks. The roof of their new home leaked aggressively whenever it rained, and the cheap yellow linoleum floor was peeling heavily at the corners. The entire place smelled like stale cigarette smoke and despair. For Susan, a woman who used to judge her neighbors harshly for having the wrong shade of white painted on their window shutters living in this metal box, was a fate worse than death. But Susan was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. She was completely incapable of genuine self-reflection. Sitting at her tiny, wobbly Formica kitchen table, she decided that this horrifying situation was still entirely my fault. She convinced herself that I was simply throwing a prolonged temper tantrum, and that I just needed the right kind of social pressure to snap out of it and remember my place. She dug through the black plastic garbage bags of her belongings and found her old leather-bound address book. She formulated a brilliant plan to organize a massive family intervention. She intended to call every single aunt, uncle, and distant cousin in our extended family. She was going to play the ultimate victim, crying about how her ruthless, ungrateful daughter had abandoned her elderly parents in a dangerous slum, while their innocent children were being unjustly persecuted by an overreaching government. She wanted to weaponize the entire family tree to guilt-trip me into rescuing them, dropping the eviction, and paying for high-powered federal defense attorneys. She picked up her cell phone and dialed the first number on her list. It was Uncle Greg, the very same man who had loudly humiliated me at the disastrous backyard barbecue just a week prior. She waited for him to answer, fully prepared to launch into her carefully rehearsed weeping routine. The line rang 3 times before he finally picked up. "Greg. Thank God you answered," Susan cried into the receiver, forcing her voice to shake with maximum theatrical trauma. "You have to help us. Rachel has gone completely insane. She locked us out of the house, and now Richard and I are living in absolute squalor in a trailer park. You need to talk some sense into her. You need to tell her she has to pay for a lawyer for Brittany and DeAndre before they ruin our family forever." There was a long, incredibly heavy pause on the other end of the line. Uncle Greg did not offer his usual loud, aggressive support. He did not immediately agree to drive over to my corporate office and demand my submission. Instead, he let out a cold, disgusted sigh. "Do not ever call this number again," Susan. Uncle Greg said, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. Susan froze, the fake tears instantly drying up on her cheeks. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. "We are family, Greg. We need your help." "You are not family," Greg fired back, his tone absolutely ruthless. "You are a couple of criminals who tried to cover up federal felonies and extort your own child. Do you honestly think we do not know exactly what is going on?" Rachel sent a massive group email to the entire extended family yesterday morning. Susan felt the color completely drain from her face. She tried to interrupt to spin a new lie, but Greg talked right over her. "She did not just tell us her side of the story, Susan," he yelled, his anger vibrating through the phone speaker. "She attached the official public court records. She attached the federal grand jury indictments for DeAndre and Brittany. She even attached the official Internal Revenue Service freeze notice, showing that Richard is being investigated for massive identity theft and tax fraud." We all read the transcripts, Susan. We read the part where Brittany was actively researching black market smugglers on the dark web, while Rachel was out of town working 80-hour weeks to pay your mortgage. We read the part where your son-in-law sold her $18,000 pet for cash to buy video games. And we read the financial spreadsheet detailing exactly how you parasites bled her dry for 4 years. Susan could not breathe. Her entire narrative was collapsing around her in real time. "You lied to my face at that barbecue," Greg continued relentlessly. "You tried to use me to bully the only decent, hardworking person in your entire immediate family. I just got off the phone with Aunt Martha and Cousin David. None of us want anything to do with you ever again. Do not ask us for money. Do not invite us to a trial. If you or Richard ever step foot on my property, I will call the police myself. You two belong in that rundown trailer park." The line went dead with a sharp click. Susan sat completely paralyzed at the wobbly kitchen table, her phone pressed tightly against her ear. She frantically redialed Greg's number, but it immediately went straight to a generic automated voicemail. He had blocked her. Panicking, she scrolled down her contact list and rapidly dialed Aunt Martha. Straight to voicemail. She dialed Cousin David. Straight to voicemail. She dialed 5 more relatives in rapid succession. Every single call was instantly rejected. I knew exactly what was happening in that rusted trailer because Uncle Greg had called me immediately after hanging up on her to profusely apologize for his behavior at the barbecue. The entire extended family had seen the undeniable legal truth, and they had collectively slammed the door in my mother's face. Susan lowered her phone, looking around the cramped, stained walls of her new reality. The silence of the trailer park was deafening. She was completely and utterly alone. 6 months passed between that frantic night in the trailer park and the final conclusion of the federal proceedings. The wheels of the United States justice system grind incredibly slowly, but they grind exceptionally fine. While my parents languished in their rusted tin box, shivering through the harsh Washington winter, DeAndre and Brittany were processed through the merciless machinery of federal court. DeAndre initially tried to fight the charges, arrogant enough to believe his public defender could somehow outsmart the Department of Justice. He demanded a trial, hoping to confuse a jury with technical jargon about cryptocurrency and decentralized networks. It was a spectacular miscalculation. I took a personal day from my new role as Senior Director of Forensic Auditing to attend the final day of his trial. I walked into the grand marble courtroom wearing a sharp cream-colored suit and took my usual seat in the back row of the gallery. The prosecution presented a case that was an absolute masterpiece of digital forensics and undeniable physical evidence. They projected the encrypted router logs I had provided onto a massive screen for the jury to read. They brought in the lead tactical agent who raided the Nevada compound, who testified under oath about the horrific conditions the trafficker kept the animals in. They even played the audio recording of DeAndre's initial interrogation, where he eagerly tried to throw his wife and father-in-law under the bus to save himself. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The guilty verdict was swift, unanimous, and completely devastating. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later, and I was present for every single minute of it. DeAndre stood before the federal judge wearing his bright orange jumpsuit, looking completely hollowed out. His broad shoulders were slumped, and his eyes stared blankly at the polished wooden floor. The judge did not hold back. He lambasted DeAndre for his sheer arrogance, his blatant disregard for federal conservation laws, and his cowardly attempt to pin his own crimes on his family. The judge brought the heavy wooden gavel down and officially sentenced DeAndre to 4 solid years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 3 years of supervised release and heavily restricted internet access. Two armed marshals stepped forward, grabbed DeAndre by his chained arms, and hauled him out of the courtroom to begin serving his time. He did not look back. Then it was Brittany's turn to face the music. Unlike DeAndre, my sister had realized early on that a jury would absolutely despise her. She had hastily accepted a plea agreement from the federal prosecutors, terrified of spending years away from her children in a women's correctional facility. She walked up to the defense podium, wearing a plain, conservative gray dress. She tried to cry, utilizing the same trembling voice and wet eyes she used to manipulate her social media followers. She told the judge she was a devoted mother who had simply made a terrible mistake out of blind loyalty to a manipulative husband. The judge peered down at her over his reading glasses, entirely unmoved by her theatrical display. He had read the digital transcripts. He knew exactly who orchestrated the exotic animal sale. He accepted her plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, but he made sure her punishment was absolute. The judge sentenced Brittany to 5 years of strict federal probation and a mandatory 500 hours of supervised community service. But the true devastation was not the probation or the grueling physical labor. The true devastation was the conviction itself. Brittany was forced to stand in open court and formally plead guilty to a federal felony conspiracy charge. The judge explicitly detailed what that meant for her future. She was now a convicted felon. She permanently lost her right to vote. She was legally barred from traveling outside the country. And most importantly, her entire professional identity was completely annihilated. Corporate sponsors run thorough background checks. No respectable brand organic baby food company or lifestyle affiliate network would ever sign a contract with a woman holding a federal felony record for conspiracy and smuggling. Her dream of returning to the internet as a beloved mommy vlogger was permanently dead. She would spend the next 500 hours picking up trash on the side of the interstate wearing a high-visibility vest, while the digital world completely forgot she ever existed. I sat quietly in the back row of the gallery, watching my sister tremble as the judge finalized her sentence. Richard and Susan were sitting a few rows ahead of me, weeping silently, as the remnants of their golden family were swept away by the gavel. I observed their collective misery with crystal-clear vision. I searched my heart for a shred of sadness, a lingering drop of familial pity, or even a twinge of regret for setting this massive chain of events into motion. I found absolutely nothing. There was no sorrow in my chest. There was no triumphant joy or manic glee either. What I felt was the profound, sterile satisfaction of a perfectly balanced ledger. They had attempted to extract my resources, steal my property, and destroy my professional reputation to subsidize their own greed. They had gambled their entire lives on the assumption that I was a weak, hysterical woman who would simply roll over and accept their abuse. They lost that gamble spectacularly. The court was officially adjourned. The gallery began to clear out. I stood up, smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my cream-colored skirt, and picked up my leather briefcase. I walked down the center aisle, passing right behind the wooden bench where my parents and sister were huddled together in their misery. They did not notice me. They were too entirely consumed by the massive wreckage of their own consequences. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the bright sunlit hallway. I did not look back at them. I walked out of the federal courthouse with my head held high, leaving them behind in the dark, and stepped confidently into the rest of my life. The crisp morning air of Seattle hit my face the moment I crossed the courthouse threshold. It smelled like rain and pine needles, a sharp, refreshing contrast to the stale, suffocated atmosphere of the federal courtroom I had just left behind. I walked briskly down the concrete steps toward my parked sedan, feeling lighter than I had in years. The heavy, suffocating anchor of my toxic family had finally been severed by the sharp blade of the justice system. I drove back to my quiet suburban house, greeted by Apollo waiting patiently at the front window, and slipped right back into my highly successful routine. For exactly 3 weeks, my life was a picture of absolute tranquility. I excelled at my new corporate director position, managing my cybersecurity team with ruthless efficiency. I drank expensive wine on my patio and slept 8 solid hours every single night. The silence in the house was a profound luxury. But toxic people are exactly like mold. If you do not completely eradicate the source, they will always find a way to creep back in through the cracks. The final desperate attempt came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was walking up my driveway, checking the brass mailbox attached to my brick porch. Interspersed between pristine corporate envelopes and premium catalogs was a cheap, flimsy white envelope. It was heavily creased, as if it had been carried around in a damp pocket for days. There was no return address, but I did not need one. I instantly recognized the sharp, aggressive cursive handwriting scrawled across the front. It was my father. I carried the mail inside, locked the heavy smart deadbolt, and walked into the kitchen. I brewed a fresh cup of espresso, sat at the granite island, and carefully tore open the cheap envelope. Inside was a single piece of lined notebook paper torn hastily from a spiral binder. It was completely covered in Richard's frantic handwriting. I took a sip of my coffee and read the final words my father would ever speak to me. The letter was an absolute masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. There was not a single sentence of genuine apology. There was absolutely no acknowledgement of the massive tax fraud he committed, the identity theft he facilitated, or the brutal emotional abuse he and Susan had subjected me to my entire life. Instead, the letter was entirely framed around his own profound suffering. He wrote about the freezing temperatures in the trailer park, the leaking roof, and the sheer humiliation of his current existence. Then he pivoted sharply to guilt. He invoked the sacred bond of blood. He wrote that family is forever, no matter what mistakes are made, and that a daughter has a divine obligation to honor her parents. He stated that I had single-handedly destroyed the family legacy by refusing to show mercy. The final paragraph was a desperate, venomous warning. He told me that God was watching my cruel actions, that God would ultimately judge me for abandoning my own flesh and blood in their darkest hour, and that my money would never buy me salvation or true happiness. He ended the letter by demanding I drive to the trailer park immediately to discuss a financial arrangement to repair the damage I had caused. I read the letter from top to bottom. Then I read it a second time, analyzing the sentence structure and the emotional levers he was attempting to pull. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel fear over his religious threats. I only felt a profound sense of validation. The letter proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Richard had learned absolutely nothing. He was utterly incapable of change. He was still the exact same entitled, arrogant man who had watched DeAndre spit on my floor. I stood up from the kitchen island, holding the lined notebook paper loosely in my hand. I walked down the hallway and stepped into my home office. I walked directly over to the heavy-duty cross-cut paper shredder sitting next to my secure server rack. I flipped the power switch. The machine hummed to life with a low mechanical growl. I did not hesitate. I fed the manipulative letter directly into the metal teeth. I watched with immense satisfaction as his frantic handwriting, his hollow threats, and his toxic demands were instantly pulverized into tiny, illegible strips of confetti. I emptied the plastic bin straight into the recycling. That was the absolute end of the line. But standing in that quiet house, I realized something important. The physical structure around me was permanently tainted by their memory. I had fixed the shattered front door. I had replaced the cracked sliding glass window on the patio. I had thoroughly sanitized the guest bedrooms. But every time I looked at the Italian dining table, I pictured DeAndre's stolen computer. Every time I looked at the kitchen stove, I saw Susan casually tossing steaks while telling me my cat was gone. The house was a monument to a war I had already won. I no longer needed the battlefield. I picked up my phone and called one of the top luxury real estate agents in the Seattle metropolitan area. She arrived the very next morning to appraise the property. She was absolutely thrilled with the condition of the home, the high-end smart security upgrades I had installed, and the pristine landscaping. I told her I wanted it listed immediately and I wanted an aggressive closing timeline. The market response was explosive. The house was listed on a Thursday afternoon. By Saturday morning, there was a massive bidding war between three wealthy tech executives moving into the area. On Monday evening, I signed the final closing paperwork. The house sold in exactly 4 days for a staggering $150,000 over the initial asking price. The buyer waived all contingencies and agreed to a 2-week cash close. My financial ledger was not just balanced, it was overflowing. The next 14 days were a whirlwind of calculated, efficient movement. I hired a premium moving service to carefully pack my artwork, my high-end furniture, and my extensive server equipment. I watched as the moving truck backed out of the driveway, taking my belongings to a secure holding facility while I finalized my next destination. The house was completely empty, echoing with every footstep. I stood in the center of the bare foyer holding a sleek, luxury leather travel carrier. Apollo was sitting comfortably inside, resting on a heated velvet pad, watching me with bright amber eyes. I slung my designer overnight bag over my shoulder. I had a massive check deposited safely in my offshore accounts. I had an untouchable corporate career. I was completely untethered from the toxic anchors of my past. I looked around the empty space one last time, feeling nothing but the thrilling electric promise of absolute freedom. I turned the handle, opened the heavy front door, and stepped out into the crisp evening air, ready to completely disappear from their lives forever. The transition from the quiet suburbs to the vibrant heart of downtown Seattle was exactly the fresh start I needed. With the massive $150,000 over-asking profit from the rapid sale of my house, combined with the substantial salary increase from my promotion to Senior Director of Forensic Auditing, I did not just buy a new place to live. I bought an absolute fortress of luxury. I purchased a state-of-the-art penthouse condominium on the 35th floor of a high-security glass tower. The building featured 24-hour concierge service private elevator access that required biometric fingerprint scanning and a dedicated underground parking garage monitored by armed security guards. It was a place where nobody could just show up unannounced. Nobody could demand a spare room, and nobody could ever steal from me again. The interior of the penthouse was a masterpiece of modern design, but more importantly, it was entirely mine. There were no compromised spaces. There was no guest room waiting to be hijacked by entitled relatives. The kitchen featured top-of-the-line stainless steel appliances and imported marble countertops that made cooking a genuine joy rather than a stressful chore dictated by someone else's appetite. I decorated the expansive living area in rich emerald greens and warm walnut wood tones exactly the way I wanted it, without a single thought given to what my mother might say about my color choices. I had built a beautiful, impenetrable sanctuary high above the chaotic noise of the city. Far below my glass tower, several towns away, the consequences of my family's incredible arrogance were playing out in a much different setting. Richard and Susan were still living in that rusted tin box in the dilapidated trailer park. The brutal Washington winter had finally broken, but the damp, freezing spring brought them absolutely no relief. The roof of the single-wide trailer leaked aggressively, forcing them to place cheap plastic buckets around the cramped living room to catch the dirty rainwater. The profound silence of their isolation had completely dissolved into bitter, relentless resentment. They no longer had me to use as a financial scapegoat. so they turned their venom entirely on each other. Susan spent her days screaming at Richard, blaming him for letting DeAndre steal his identity and ruining their retirement. Richard screamed right back, cursing Susan for coddling Brittany their entire lives and creating the monster that ultimately destroyed them. They were trapped in a miserable, squalid prison of their own making, entirely forgotten by the extended family they had once tried to manipulate. DeAndre was experiencing his own version of hell, locked away in a federal penitentiary thousands of miles away. The man who once bragged about running my house and building a digital empire was now just another anonymous number in a bright orange jumpsuit. The federal prison system did not care about his supposed entrepreneurial genius or his loud demands for respect. His days of sleeping until noon and ordering expensive steaks on my dime were permanently over. He woke up at 5 in the morning, ate terrible institutional food from a plastic tray, and spent his time scrubbing concrete floors under the watchful eyes of armed federal guards. He had absolutely zero access to a computer, let alone the cryptocurrency wallets he had so proudly bragged about. His fake digital wealth could not buy him an extra blanket in his freezing cell, and his arrogant smirk had been completely erased by the harsh, violent reality of federal lockup. And then there was Brittany. My sister, the former glamorous mommy vlogger who thought she was untouchable, was currently paying her massive debt to society on the side of a busy interstate highway. She was forced to complete 500 hours of mandatory supervised community service. 3 days a week, rain or shine, she had to wear a cheap, oversized neon orange safety vest over her clothes. She walked along the muddy shoulder of the highway, holding a sharp metal stick, picking up fast food wrappers, discarded soda bottles, and dirty tires thrown from passing cars. Her hands, once perfectly manicured and displayed in sponsored videos, were now blistered and calloused from gripping the heavy metal trash grabber. The exhaust fumes from the massive freight trucks coated her skin in a thin layer of grime. She had no ring light. She had no adoring audience of strangers leaving heart emojis in her comments. The only people watching her were annoyed drivers speeding past, completely oblivious to the fact that the miserable woman picking up their trash used to believe she was a digital celebrity. Her perfectly curated world had been entirely reduced to a heavy plastic garbage bag and a criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. I did not think about them very often. They were no longer a haunting presence in my life, merely a closed file in my mental archives. I sat in my luxurious new living room, the morning sun pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The panoramic view of the Seattle skyline and the deep blue waters of the Puget Sound was absolutely breathtaking. I took a slow sip of my premium dark roast espresso, savoring the rich, complex flavor. Apollo, my beautiful $18,000 F1 Savannah cat, was stretched out comfortably on the warm hardwood floor. He was bathing in a bright square of sunlight, his spotted fur gleaming, purring so loudly I could hear it over the soft jazz playing on my high-end sound system. He was safe, he was loved, and he was home. I looked out over the glittering city, feeling a profound sense of peace settle deep into my bones. The ledger was perfectly balanced. I smiled, looking directly into the reflection of the glass. They thought my boundaries were a joke, so I let the federal government be the punchline. If this story taught you anything, remember, when toxic family members show you who they are, do not argue with them. Audit them. Hit subscribe if you agree.